this on now? Okay. It's now 7:32. I'm calling the public session back into order. I'm sitting in for President Cheryl Felice, who was called away for a family emergency. And we will rise and do the pledge. Mr. Flippin, to
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
emergency evacuation and meeting procedures. Please note the exits in case of an emergency. Leave in an orderly fashion. This is a smoke-free school district, and smoking is not permitted in the building or anywhere on any school grounds. This is also a hate-free and bully-free school district. We have coming up board consent agenda. I'm just having to refresh the agenda here. I'm sorry. Okay. Is the board consent agenda, are you requesting approval of C1 through C5?
That is correct.
Okay, is there a motion
Was that
to?
5 or 6?
So they wanted to,
Oh, correct, 1 through 6. Thank you for that correction. Is there a motion to approve items C1 through C6? Trustee Kavanaugh, second by Trustee Trent.
Christine, is there an issue?
I'm sorry, no, the legal notice, I think, has to be done after.
right,
We have to do that separate?
Yes.
correct.
All right,
That's what
so,
I'll make the recommendation.
okay, hold on, we've got to undo what we just did. Trustee Trent and Trustee Kavanaugh, do you withdraw your motion and second?
Yes.
Okay, so we're starting from scratch. Is there a motion to approve items C1 through C5? Trustee Kavanaugh has the motion, Trustee Trent has the second. All in favor? It's unanimously approved. Next, you're requesting approval of C6.
We will be requesting approval for C6 after our discussion items reflected in agenda items F3, F4, and F5.
Okay, so we'll go back to that.
Correct.
So next, we turn this over to you, Superintendent.
Yeah, at this point, it gives me great pleasure to recognize one of our outstanding educators and teachers that have been serving in the district for quite a time now. You've actually often heard us talk about our civics education, which is extremely important. I think there's been sort of a narrative out there that schools have sort of shied away from teaching kids civics, which is basically how governments work, arming our students and our communities with the tools they need to advocate for themselves in an appropriate manner. You know, especially with the advent of social media and social media advocacy, where you feel like you're making a change just by hitting a like button, or engaging in attack ads or hateful speech when you don't agree with something. Certainly, teaching civics is something that's really important because we want our community members and certainly our governments to operate in a civil manner. And what we try to do is instill these skills in our students and equip them with the idea and knowledge of how do you affect change? Who are the decision makers? What knowledge should you have before you start advocating for a certain cause? And we start this process early. We have students making presentations as young as third grade when they're writing little opinion papers. Certainly at Frank P. Long. There'll be a Civics Day hosted in May at the middle school. And certainly, I had the great pleasure of attending a Civics Day presentation at the high school, which was really fantastic. We had elected officials in, and in fact, one of the student presentations regarding a cross street here in the community immediately resulted, I'm sorry, I lost the words, resulted in actual change. And students were concerned about the lack of markings in the cross street and the lack of a traffic light where there was a fatal accident, and they advocated to an elected official, and change is happening immediately. It's a great way to empower students. And one of the many people leading this charge, we have our curriculum assistant superintendent, Beth Doyle, Jackie O'Hagan, Monica Tetuan, there's a lot of teachers involved in this endeavor, but Andrew Budress has been in the classroom, the man in the trenches, talking to our kids about topics that can be difficult to talk about. He navigates these things with ease, and as a first-year superintendent, I already know this, which speaks to his sort of practice. So I just wanted to acknowledge Andrew Budress. He was selected by the New York State Council of Social Studies Teachers for Social Studies as New York State Outstanding Social Studies Teacher of the Year. So at this time, I want to present him with a certificate. Super proud, everybody. All right, so here's your certificate. I don't know if board members want to take a photo for, you want to say any words, or?
Sure,
Just you.
I'll say that when I got the award, when you look at, I was so appreciative that Jackie nominated me for it, and when I was selected, they definitely appreciated, I think they appreciated what we do here as a risk-taking kind of thing, and I can't do that kind of thing without administrative support, without board support. So when I talk to other social studies teachers, they're always a little jealous of how much support I get when we come up with an idea and it involves risk-taking. Also, I think they really appreciate the equitable approach we take, and when we have a good idea, we try and make sure that it's something that every student can participate in at every level of class that they're in. And that's something that requires a huge amount of buy-in from the teaching staff. So that sort of thing doesn't happen unless you have way more people than I to really back up these initiatives. And then lastly, a lot of the work that we got recognized for is PBL work, project-based learning, and what makes that look so good is the work of our students. So we have such exceptional students that when the work is put out to the public and people are so impressed, those things are not designed really to have too heavy a stamp by the faculty. It's really the kids and their creativity and their expertise. So that, I think, is what put me in a position to get this sort of recognition, but I wouldn't have it if I was in a different district.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Very good. Congratulations again. Celebrate the moment, memorialize it.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, well done.
Yeah, you can tell.
It's a call.
All guys in the back.
There you go. No, you gotta be front of me, so please don't wear jeans.
I'm wearing jeans.
Perfect, that's perfect. All right, here we go, ready, one. And I'll do one more. Perfect.
Great, thank you.
Congratulations. Control tab, Ms. Maresca. There. Oh. Technology, I'm signed out. Give me one moment. Thank you for your patience. I'm going to be doing my superintendent's report. And just for the Board of Trustees, Bryn Johnson cannot be here. She's been feeding a lacrosse, which is not surprising to me because that student is involved in so much. So I will be reading her report. She emailed it to me so I can read it on her behalf. So let's get started with our report. All right, so I want to start with this slide, which seems odd. But I did want to say publicly to the Board of Trustees that as a first-year superintendent, I'm very pleased that I was not in a position to call a snow day, much to the dismay of many students who wish for snow days. We get a nice dress rehearsal for blade opening, so I want to compliment our custodial staff. And again, the idea is going to be to get that message out as early as possible for the benefit of the community. But I just want to say, happy spring, South Country. I'm glad spring is finally here. I was at multiple buildings throughout the week, and students are just smiling. And spring is in the air, so I'm really happy about that. Going back, customarily, I've been reporting COVID numbers since early fall, actually. I'm hoping to stop making these reports if the federal government designates the official end of the pandemic. May 11th was the tentative date that would happen. But just for the sake of information, I like sharing this information. So these are the numbers as of March 3rd. We had 291 total cases reported to the district. In the last 2 weeks, we've only had one additional case. So I'm hoping that the fact that these numbers have dwindled so monumentally kind of indicates that this is sort of behind us. So I'm very optimistic in that regard. Next, I had the privilege of attending the REFIT legislative breakfast with Trustee Hayes and Ms. Segee, our business official. And basically, REFIT is the Reform Educational Financing at a loss. Initiative.
Equities.
Yeah, equity, sorry. Been one of those days, a lot of public speaking. But basically, this organization looks at how schools are financed and they appeal or advocate on our behalf. And I just wanted to quickly summarize some of the topics that came up during this legislative breakfast. Actually, our PTA council president was there, Chris Moresco just walked in, was with us during this breakfast. But they talked about the foundation aid formula and state aid and how those formulas are determined and calculated and their advocacy for school districts. They talked about the tax cap and the tax cap formula. A few budget presentations ago, I talked about the 8-step formula that's used to determine the tax cap. And there was a lot of issues in terms of how that calculation is done, including the inclusion of pilots as revenue, because it artificially sort of lowers the tax cap, putting districts sometimes in a precarious situation to maintain their operations. They talked about civil service reform. School districts are having a hard time sometimes promoting or obtaining civil service workers because their system is somewhat antiquated. They actually used to use a paper mail system to get candidates. They haven't moved to the electronic age. So, school districts are advocating for some reform in that end. Universal school meals is, again, an advocacy for all school districts who feel that students should just have access to food regardless in public schools. It shouldn't be a choice that students need to make when they go to school, whether or not they can pay for their food. So I think that's something that many of us can sort of support. Pre-K funding was spoken about. The funding formulas that are used are basically 20 years old, and they haven't adjusted the sort of numbers used to make these calculations since, I believe, the 2000 census. So obviously, when you're given inflation and the cost of living, there has to be some sort of change in pre-K funding. There's also advocacy to limit the number of charter schools in school districts. Remember, school districts or public school districts encumber some of the costs associated with charter schools within their boundaries. So there's some advocacy for that. And finally, the hiring of new teachers. The tier system, our retirement system, one of the things that attracts teachers to this position is job security and certainly pensions at the end of the career. I don't think anybody can become rich from a career in education, but you have some security in the form of our entitlements and pensions. Tier 6 has changed that dramatically, and what we're seeing is less people interested in the profession as a result. So these are just some of the topics that were discussed that morning. Really informative, and it's great to have this organization advocating on our behalf. I also had the privilege of going to the the Eastern Suffolk BOCES PTA Showcase Dinner. Basically, that's an event highlighting their multiple programs that many of our students participate in. Our PTA council joined me during this event, as well as Principal De La Rosa from the high school. But it was really fantastic to see everything that Eastern Suffolk BOCES provides. And in our last budget presentation on curriculum and instruction, you saw some budget lines that speak to our contracting with BOCES. But just to give you a sort of clue as to what was covered, they covered things like barbering, and I apologize for the size of the photos, but people watching at home can see them clearly. Audio video production, including broadcast journalism, contracting, animal care, law enforcement, health careers, computer hardware, maritime mechanics, which is really cool, coding, aviation, and our very own Belcourt High School student, Tyreek Booker, who is studying to be HVAC mechanic, which is HVAC are the systems used for climate control in schools. What was amazing about this is one of the sort of focuses for schools now is the shift away from this idea that everybody has to go to college. And I had a wonderful college experience, so please don't mistake my words. College is extremely important for many regards. But I think the idea is we have to think of our students as being the 3 E's, and I'm taking that from Bob Vecchio, the president of NYSBA, which is the New York State Association of School Boards. But the 3 E's represents being enrolled, which means being in a school, being employed, or being enlisted. And if all of our graduates fall into one of these 3 categories, I think we're doing kind of a great job with our graduates. Even cooler than that, so these are services offered to high school students. They spend half their day doing academics in their home school, and they spend either the afternoon or morning at BOCES learning these skills and these trades. Eastern Suffolk BOCES also offers a summer program for middle school students where they can explore all these different types of positions and professions, which is really fantastic to really plant that seed in kids at a young age. We also got to see a demonstration of some of their practices. This was the maritime mechanics. We got to play around or see some engines and learned a lot about boats, and that's something that's in my wheelhouse. I think the people that were with me really enjoyed the presentation and the information. So I do want to thank the PTA Council and again Principal De La Rosa for joining me. It really was a fantastic night, and I'm glad that we collaborate with Eastern Suffolk BOCES for the services they provide for our students. Next, last week was National Foreign Language Week, which was observed with activities at our secondary schools. Belport Middle School had a week of activities that went from the Class Olympics all the way to a food day, which I'll talk about in a second. The high school also had a week to celebrate our different cultures and different languages, which was fantastic. But some of the things I saw was great wall art at Belport Middle School, where kids decorated the lobby area by the auditorium with sort of cultural images that represented everything from Germany to Ireland, to Latin American countries, Asian countries. It was really fantastic to see. Our high school students also participated in several activities at the high school, one of which was a field trip to Huntington. They went to see a foreign film at the Huntington Cinema Center, which was really fantastic. And they also got to have a nice, yummy Mexican lunch down in the village down there. So it was a great sort of experience for those students. We also had a trivia challenge day at the middle school, which the kids were super excited about and participated in the auditorium. We had Cinema Day at the middle school as well, where they watched different films from different countries and different languages. And finally, we had the International Food Day, which I had the pleasure of attending with Trustee Hayes. And it was great. And one of the benefits of these types of events is, you get to sample different foods, the kids interact with each other. But we also stumbled upon, it was also happened to be St. Patrick's Day, and we kind of got a lesson on sort of the history of Ireland from one of our staff members, which was really cool. And we shared it with Sophia, who's in the picture. And again, this was a great example of what we mean by cultural responsiveness, which leads to my next slide. I wanted to talk a little bit about St. Patrick's Day from a culturally responsive lens. Cultural responsiveness, basically, and I found this definition from the U.S. Department of Health website. It's actually from the Child Welfare Information Gateway. And I'm going to read the definition because I think it's important. But cultural responsiveness enables individuals and organizations to respond respectfully and effectively of people of all cultures, languages, classes, races, ethnic backgrounds, disabilities, religions, genders, sexual orientations, and other diversity factors in a manner that recognizes, affirms, and values their worth. Being culturally responsive requires having the ability to understand cultural differences, recognize potential biases, and look beyond differences to work productively with children, families, and communities whose cultural contexts are different from one's own. That's a very fancy way of saying that we want to create sort of a culture of belonging, where everybody feels celebrated and like they belong. And it really got me thinking about St. Patrick's Day, because on St. Patrick's Day, and this is kind of my own definition, which basically cultural responsiveness to me is the means by which we can acknowledge and celebrate our differences in a manner that unifies us all as Americans and as Clippers when we talk about our sort of community here. Because on St. Patrick's Day, everybody is Irish. And we've always heard that, but we never talked about it from a culturally responsive lens. And to me, this is the perfect example of cultural responsiveness. On St. Patrick's Day, we all celebrate Irish culture. We talk about Irish traditions, and not in a way that we're trying to indoctrinate people to change their mindsets and not be proud of their own heritage, but celebrate somebody else's heritage and benefit from it. And I really thought it was fantastic to really engage in these conversations, to see different kids wearing different, shamrocks. And it really was to me like, oh my God, here it is. This is it. This is what we talk about. It's all inclusive. And I had a special stake in this day because, according to my DNA profile, I am 4% Irish. So I had a great conversation with Anne Hayes, and we share Scottish heritage. I'm also 14% Scottish. And so that led into a conversation. And this is what we mean about responsiveness. If it wasn't for days like St. Patrick's Day, perhaps these conversations would never happen, and perhaps we would never find a commonality that, who knows, maybe Anne Hayes and I have shared ancestors. One never knows when you look down that historical road. But I just wanted to share that. It's a great day for all of our Irish friends and community members. Happy belated St. Patrick's Day. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our high school winter concerts. We had 2 winter concerts this past season, which featured various ensemble groups, like our wind ensemble band, and our final performance for our wind ensemble seniors, who did a fantastic job. We also had our treble choir, we had our symphonic band, and also we talk about student accolades. Our musicians also receive accolades. We had students who were Division III East All-County musicians. We often hear about all-county athletes, but we also have all-county musicians. That was also great. And our South Country Symphonic Orchestra did a sort of performance combining all of the groups. That was really great. Our department chair of music, Victoria Hartman, actually sang with the altos, and it was conducted by Mr. Finnegan. But I do want to give a shout out to our entire music staff, because yet again, South Country was designated as a best community for music education. It's a great accolade to have. And this coming Monday, March 21st, our jazz band is going to be performing at the Jazz Loft in Stony Brook. This performance is a result of a master class that was sponsored by the South Country Education Foundation. Without their support, this could not have happened. And on Monday, I'm so excited to watch our kids perform in such a beautiful venue. And speaking of the South Country Educational Foundation, I invited Robin Young-Rowe and Diane Sanazzi here, so I could give them sort of a formal acknowledgement. Back in the fall, I presented this slide, just sort of displaying the foundation's generosity. They sponsored all these things that have come to fruition during the course of the school year, including the Jazz Ensemble Masterclass that you see there in the middle of the slide. But their generosity doesn't stop. Their generosity continues in the spring. This spring, they have sponsored, and there's a lot, a field trip to the aquarium for 2nd graders to learn about our wetlands. I think sometimes, and this is me as a city native, we're used to traveling, and sometimes I feel like people stay within a certain radius, and you don't realize the beautiful ecosystems that exist all around us. So this is a great opportunity to expose 2nd graders and learn about our wetlands. It went too fast. By going to the trip to the aquarium and engaging in some workshops. They also sponsored a 3D printer for Frank P. Long's 5th graders that will enable them to design and print their own creations. A boat ride departing from Captree for 3rd graders to learn about the waters around us and oceanography. A trip to Watch Hill for 1st graders to learn about barrier beaches and wildlife. A trip to the Cornell Suffolk County Farm to learn about local farming, and Cornell's my alma mater. I have had the privilege of visiting the schools for College and Career Day. I'm continuing my visitations. I started at Brookhaven, and at first, and I'll talk about this at my next report, I was like, how do I talk about kindergartners and first graders about college and careers? They were amazing. But one of the stories I told was I was an animal science major originally, and I said, in life you have choices, and your career choices may change. And we engaged in a conversation about some of the trauma I had working with farm animals, so it's ironic that they're going to be visiting the farm. So I thought that was pretty funny. They also sponsored a trip to the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center located in Nassau County. Students who are reading the book Thief in their English classes will be visiting the center to discuss the book and reflect upon the Holocaust. Perhaps have an opportunity to speak with a Holocaust survivor, which is really a fantastic experience. I've been really fortunate to have sat for about 5 of these presentations, and they're always moving and memorable. With the passage of time, the Holocaust survivors are becoming fewer and fewer in number. So there may be a second generation person whose parents were survivors, but at the very least, it's a wonderful sort of center. It used to literally be less than a mile away from my former high school where I worked. So we used to do a lot of programs with them, so I'm excited about that. There's also a sponsored field trip and experience at the Brookville Adventure Education Center for our restorative coaches and students working with some at-risk kids, so they can form some bonding and talk about life, sort of troubleshooting and problem solving. Continue collaboration with SEED, so local environmental organization, where they'll provide workshops. And finally, something I find pretty cool, it's called Plyaways, which basically is a technology enabling kids to listen to books or audiobooks at their pace and at their level simultaneously. So it promotes literacy and choice for students in the early grades. In all, in the spring, it's an additional over $16,000 in grants awarded to the South Country Central School District. And at this point, I want to acknowledge the South Country Education Foundation with a certificate, a little token of appreciation. So Rob and Dan, if you want to come up and receive this acknowledgement, on behalf of the Board of Trustees, and I think I can speak for all of them, we're so appreciative of your efforts and your support. So thank you so much. I don't know if you want to say any words, or?
I would just reiterate what Andrew Budrick said about support. We get support from the school board, local businesses, the community, restaurants. Nearly 400 people attended our event. We get support from the Apsquizzy Foundation, from the widow of a former superintendent, significant amount of money each year. And plus we raised, about $80,000 at our event last summer, and we're just trying to spend it.
So when we do our budget presentations, we talk about other revenue. Let me see. So thank you so much for your support. I think Eric will take a quick photo.
Yep.
Thank you again for your support. And finally, before I read Ms. Johnson's student report, again, there's many ways to keep in touch with some South Country happenings. I only capture a little bit of it. There's a lot of great things happening here. Go to the website. There is a community portal. You can input your email to get district-wide emails or any correspondence that goes out district level. There's also a link for the Superintendent's Corner, which takes you to the Superintendent's Corner. I update that page on a monthly basis. My contact information is there. My Twitter feed is there if you don't have Twitter on your devices. And I provide a weekly update. It's kind of a blog, a stream of consciousness that's available to the community on a weekly basis. So I really encourage people to visit our website and check these resources out. That concludes my report, and I am going to read the report that was submitted by our student. What's her official title, Ms. Hayes? Officio.
Ex-officio.
The ex officio, very fancy title for Ms. Johnson, and she's not here. I love always putting her on the spot. But she said, March is National Athletic Training Month. To bring recognition to this profession as demands of athletic trainers continually evolve, each year, Henry Schein, a medical supply company, puts out a survey to nominate an athletic trainer who goes above and beyond and stands out from the rest. Peers nominate various athletic trainers from all over the country for this award. From the nominations, a committee composed of sports medicine professionals selects 6 people to move on to be finalists. This year, our athletic trainer, Gina Harris, was selected as a finalist for this award. Gina is so dedicated to her work and always goes the extra mile to ensure her athletes are receiving the best care so they can get back in the game rapidly. Nobody understands the importance of her job until you have watched her firsthand, the way I have, Mrs. Bryn, the last few years through her work-based learning athletic training internship, where she taught me so much about sports medicine and the sports medicine world. To vote, you can go to Henry Schein, Raising Star World, or follow this link. I'll be sharing the link out with the district, and we'll post it on our website if you want to support. And that's a report in terms of nominating our athletic trainer for this prestigious accolade. The class Olympics have been postponed to May 18th due to conflicting athletic schedules on the original date. Students are very excited to go whitewater rafting. It will be a great bonding experience for students. Whitewater rafting can create a healthy work environment because everyone has to work together in order to stay afloat. So we are very excited for this fun team building experience. Spirit Month is going strong. 2 weeks ago we had anything but a backpack day, and there was a lot of creativity among students, from coolers to mini shopping carts and everything in between. As athletes are beginning for spring athletics, the campus is buzzing with athletes after school, and the energy from all teams is very strong. They are excited for the season to start and to represent Bellport. Finally, we are preparing to hold student council elections at the end of April, and we are going to review the student council constitution to see if it needs updating. And that concludes our ex officio report by Ray Johnson. Thank you all.
Thank you. So, since our ex officio member has already delivered her report through the superintendent, we'll now start with other trustees. Mr. Barry?
I have nothing to report other than just to reiterate my excitement and enthusiasm for those people who were recognized here this evening. Again, a little bit of Clipper pride.
Mr. Puccini?
Yeah, I've got a couple things. But first, I'll take the opportunity to say that Gina is absolutely an amazing, amazing athletic trainer. I know she's taken care of my son all through high school, and she really is. She's something. So it's well deserved. So I hope you can all vote for her. I also want to congratulate Mr. Budgers. Did he leave? You always leave when it's our time, you know? I'm now mad at him. Anyway, we can tell you how great Mr. Budgers is, but when you actually have one of your kids in his class, you'll really see it, because he piques a lot of great interest in kids of all sorts. And also, you know, I always thought he was the AP guy and only taught the AP kids. And then my kid had him in class, and he really brings out a lot of creativity in his thought process on world events and in social studies, and I think cultivated a love for social studies by my kid. And I have a love for social studies, so that's awesome, and I love talking to him as well, because he's an interesting guy to talk history with and politics and current affairs. There is a couple of things. So I had a Nassau-Suffolk School Board Executive Committee meeting last week, and there was a couple of points out of that meeting from various forums and venues that I thought would worth be mentioned. Some came out from the refit meeting that the superintendent mentioned as well. A couple of things. One thing I thought was interesting of note at one event with newly elected Congressman Lilota and Congressman Garbarino, there is some significant confidence that the law for the SALT deductions will be reworked. And I know that's always, a topic in this part of the country and how it impacts everything. So that was kind of interesting to see how it kind of came about. So I don't think it's going away, but there's talk that there will be some sort of significant changes to it that could benefit our taxpayers. A bunch of things, a lot of the discussion at the meeting was about the both one-house budgets that came out and what the analysis kind of showed, and there were just a couple of key points that I'll rattle off that I thought was interesting. First and foremost being that both one-house budgets did not call for any additional funding for charter schools. I thought that was significant, especially considering the SUNY chancellor is the former education commissioner who's has autonomy over, I think, charter schools, right? That comes from the SUNY chancellor, not the education commissioner. and he's a big proponent for charter schools. So that was kind of refreshing to see. I think a lot of people were nervous about charter schools and funding now with John King involved in SUNY. I'm sorry, I'm out of order. This is just one comment that was discussed by both of the superintendents. We have two superintendents, one from Nassau and one from Suffolk. We have Maria Rihanna from Nassau, and we had Dr. Roberta Gerald from Middle Country. A lot of talk among superintendents about the impact the Child Victims Act is having on school districts. Those are not familiar with it, there was a law passed last year which I think extended the statute of limitations on any crimes in a school or sexual harassment or, 25 years. Whether that sounds like it's a wonderful cause, and it's wonderful that victims who did not come forward many years ago have an avenue of retribution. The problem now is many school districts are struggling with finding out if they even had insurance and who that insurance was. I know when we have a couple cases, and we had to actually, did we hire a consultant last year? And to dig up who our insurance carrier actually was. But there were some horror stories, and there was a school district, I don't know if it was upstate or out east, they have 48 lawsuits against them, and the school district's total budget is like $25 million. So that will absolutely bankrupt any school district if they do not have funding. So there is some significant concern as to what these awards will come in and whether they'll be covered by insurance or at a budget. So that's just something to note and to pay attention to when it comes to funding. I mentioned the charters. I have that on it twice. Both one-house budgets are very similar in regards to education funding and the amounts, which is significant because it's a complete shift in power of what we've seen over the previous administrations, where most of the power came from the governor's office. It seems that both houses seem to be going back and forth with the governor. It seems to have a little bit more power. So there's a lot of confidence that education funding will be, we've seen it so far, and it looks like it's going to be good, but it could continue that way. So that was interesting to note. The high-impact tutoring funding is being pulled out of the foundation formula, which is the tune of $250 million. That's, I believe, has some positive impacts on how that formula is calculated. So that was important. And that was mostly it for the budget analysis. I will add of note, I did get an email from the executive director at Nassau Suffolk School Board today seeking executive committee members who want to ask a question of the commissioner at their event next month in April. So I've been asked to come up with a question if I wish. So I would prefer if that question or the topic of the question was kind of formulated from the board. So if anybody, I think we should, if somebody, maybe we can put something out, I can put this in an email. Maybe we can just come up with some topics. I can throw some questions around. If you have a sample question or something you really want to hear from, if I do get the opportunity to ask a question directly of the commissioner, it would be nice if it was specific to South Country, and I think it would be a nice way to start some dialogue. And then one interesting note, I did not know that Dr. Gerald of, I think she's retiring this year, right, at Middle Country, began her education career here at Bellport Middle School as a teacher. I did not know that. So as we had a little fun back and forth, she said, well, I know your district pretty well because that's where I started. And that's it that I've got for, and just if anybody's going to any of those Nassau Suffolk events, I know the one with the commissioner's coming up, and there's another one in between that, just, please let us know as soon as possible.
Can I
Thank
ask
you.
you a question
Sure.
about your report? Because
Yeah.
I thought I read somewhere that both houses on the budget negotiation are supporting the free school meals for everybody.
You know what? So thank you for saying that, because I think I was trying to go in chronological order, and I think I skipped over that, and that was, okay, yeah, so next week, or it might even be this week, because it was last week when I was there, I get the exact date. Nassau Suffolk School Board, along with the Superintendent's Council, is having a press conference at Huntington High School. And they will, and it's really about providing free meals. And yes, both one-house budgets include funding for free meals for all. Or, I don't know if it's breakfast and lunch or if it's just lunch, I'm not 100% sure. But yes, that seems to be getting pushed through. There's a lot of support in Albany for that. So that does seem like that will happen. So thanks for asking that, because I skipped right over it, and that was the first bullet.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Trustee Kavanaugh?
I have nothing to report.
Trustee Flippin? Trustee
ahead, Tara.
Tritt? I would only comment about the music programs that I went to at the high school, and it was phenomenal. And also, I thoroughly enjoyed the St. Patrick's Day event at the middle school. And if we could bottle the atmosphere from that day and see how our students were engaged in the entire event, I think it would really warm the heart of everybody. So thank you for the invitation, Dr. Colson, and with regard to your comment about talking about our Irish heritage, we found out he's more Irish than I am. So we got a pretty good chuckle out of that one.
That's what really is.
Okay. Next, we're at the public commentary section. If there's anybody in the audience who wants to speak, you need to fill out a yellow card and give it to the clerk. And I have 2 already. So before I call anyone up, I just need to read the public commentary announcement. To let you know that public commentary occurs 2 times during the meeting. The first one, which is this one, is for agenda items only. And the second, at the end of the meeting, for non-agenda items. The comments from each speaker are limited to 3 minutes per person. Total time for the public session is limited to 30. Comments relating to a personnel matter or individual students will not be entertained in public. Public commentary is a time for the board to hear comments from the public. It's not a question and answer period between the board and the public. If asked, informational questions requiring short answers will be addressed. However, the board will not enter into a dialogue with a speaker during public commentary. District residents who need additional information will be guided to an administrator who will address their questions or concerns. Both cards that I have are for non-agenda items. Would the board take this out of order and go ahead and do it now so that the commentators could leave after they speak if they choose, or stay for the rest of the meeting?
I'm fine with that.
It's okay? All right. Then our first card is from John Barnett.
Thank you. John Barnett, Melrose Parkway.
Do you feel more comfortable standing there or at the podium?
I'm not typing it though. John Barnett, Melrose Parkway, East Patchogue. I'm here because of a recent decision that was made that delayed the retiree benefits, Medicare, for the retirees to over 1 year. Many of the retirees are in their 70s and 80s, and some of them use this reimbursement to meet their daily expenses. When we received the notification, I did not see anything in regards to how it would be handled if all of a sudden the retiree passes away, even after they would do the money, the time and expense the board would need to search out their heirs, or for that matter, holding on to their money, what about interest? I will tell you, there is a growing number of voters who have become turned off by this gimmickry and expressed that they will not support the budget, upcoming budget. If this is the type of gimmickry that's being used, we know about this one. Is there any others? Personally, I have always supported the school and the budget, but I'm having a hard time with this because it doesn't make any sense to me at all. It should be back to the 6 months where it was fair and equitable for everyone. This is required reimbursement, expected to be done in a timely manner. I thank you for your time and for listening.
Thank you for your comment. Should we comment that the auditors, if directed? Okay.
Yeah, just, Mr. Barnett, we are going to have a response. I actually met with some retirees, and so I just wanted to say that we're working out sort of a way to remediate your concerns. So, I appreciate, I know there's been time that's already lapsed, and I apologize for that. Certainly value the contributions you've made to our school district, all of our retirees, and we're looking to sort of remediate it as quickly as possible. So we'll have a discussion. I've met with a few retirees in the time since our last board meeting, and we're putting something together. I apologize, putting budget presentations is very time consuming, and that's kind of been a priority. Not that the retirees are not a priority to us, but we'll be following up very soon.
Our next speaker is June Johnson.
Can I have John's time that he didn't use?
3 minutes, Ms.
All right, I
Johnson.
try.
Per
Before you
person.
start timing me, I just want to thank you. And maybe you can invest in microphones so we can hear you better and the choir back there? Okay, we're getting old. All right, I'm 50 years a resident. My name is June Johnson, worked in the school district as a school district social worker from 85 to 2006. Between 80 and 85, I worked in the high school. All the districts except the middle school. My children went through the district. I received, as did the other eligible retirees, a letter, undated letter I received it January 3rd, indicating Medicare eligible retiree reimbursement for 2023 was to be sent out in March of '24. I made a call to Ms. Segee's office, and Marie Perry, who was a former secretary in the district, and I met with Ms. Segee and Ms. Frank on 2/3/23, and she had indicated, as per other phone calls I had made, that it was too much work for the accounting staff to get this out to us in a timely manner. She said she would send out another letter with more details. I made calls regarding that letter. I left a voicemail for her, never heard, no letter, no response. Letter I sent to Ms. Felice. She said she met with Mr. Segee, was to meet with Mr. Santana. She was going to follow up and let me know. Nada. I really felt like I was being stonewalled here. Ms. Halfine and I met on March 15th with Mr. Santana. He said he would check further and possibly have a live Zoom meeting with retirees to explain everything, which I appreciated. One thing that totally befuddles me is that both Nassau, Suffolk CSEAs, other districts in our consortium, Suffolk AME, of which Ms. Felice is a part of, and the town of Brookhaven have not changed the frequency of the reimbursements. Why us? Okay, I want to read to you some of the responses from the, that Ms. Poulos has transcribed. If this is the trend, will the 2024 reimbursement not happen until June 25? 2025 reimbursement in September 26? What's going on? Will there include interest, which was brought up by Mr. Barnett? All of us are on fixed incomes. And I received many notices from folks who used that money. It was dedicated to help them out with their expenses. Is this an audit issue? We're told that the auditors had suggested it, and we're also told that this came down from Ms. Costa. I think the whole thing is a nasty blow to our gut. Also, I was wondering if the Board of Ed people, if you received the letter from Mr. Lowen, Marv Lowen. It was supposed to be in your mailboxes. Did you all receive it? Far out. I thought you wouldn't receive it, so I brought extra copies. Extra copies for whoever wants. Okay, I've said what I've had to say. Please consider it. This has really been a punch to our gut. And the stonewalling by folks that we're paying their salaries is not appreciated. Thank you. Good night. Peace be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
And with your spirit.
And thank you, Ms. Johnson. I'm going to be following up shortly, so
Thank you. Thank you.
I think next, we have something. This is back to you,
Yep.
Superintendent.
Thank you, Vice President Hayes. So our first item for discussion is a middle school presentation I'm really excited about. In sort of assessing our instructional programs and trying to remediate some of the things that we want to address in our system, the whole spectrum of course offerings, and to try to enhance the experiences for our students. the middle school team, inclusive of administrators, district administrators, teachers, got together to brainstorm an idea to restructure our 6th grade program. And it gives me great pleasure and pride to introduce Dr. Colson, the middle school principal, who will be presenting a summary of this work and a synopsis of the proposed changes. I'm coming up to the podium just to set up the technology for Dr. Colson. But at this time, I want to welcome Dr. Colson.
Thank you.
And I have to say this publicly, when I go to the middle school, I get confused. And kids call me Dr. Colson. He gets the haircut.
Yes, I may have to visit that BOCES program. that I'm talking about.
We'll get there. All right, and then to advance the slide, you just hit the right arrow.
Okay.
All right, Dr. Colson.
Good evening, Vice President Hayes, Board of Education trustees. Thank you, Superintendent Mr. Santana. Thank you for the opportunity to be a part of your work session and to be able to share some of the great things that are going on at the Bellport Middle School. And as Mr. Santana has already started, that our current situation where we have students have one STEM teacher as well as one humanities teacher, reflective of the highlights that you'll see there. They're in a 3-period block, so basically it takes up 6 periods of the day, and then we want to share our new proposal. Our new proposal, very interesting. The middle school is the only school in the district that has elementary and middle school mixed together, as far as where you have, elementary and secondary. Where you have at the high school, you have all secondary, Vern W. Kritz, Brookhaven, Kramer Street, and Frank P. Long, you have all elementary. But in the middle school, that's where they meet together. This new proposal would align us so that the 6th grade students and teachers would be aligned with the secondary model. So therefore, we would be able to roll things out as far as a much more effective way. Some of the things that I'm going to talk about with the new program is that we've separated as far as the readers and writers workshops, where that's now going to be 2 separate curriculums. That'll be 2 separate classes that students will receive grades for, as well as also the math support and the language exploration. And we're hoping with all of these 4 changes that we will get the win, that you see the win up there, and that is what I need, but I'll go over a little more about that a little later on in the presentation. So looking at, again, some of the changes that I mentioned, the Readers and Writers Workshop will be separate courses with separate curriculums, and they will continue to prepare students to meet the New York State learning standards, as well as prepare them for the opportunities for them to develop their 21st century literacy skills. Let's look at some schedules, so this way we'll be able to talk a little more about the actual proposed changes. The math support class that will be designed, it's an every other day class, and it's designed to meet students that are in need of remediation, as well as if they're in need of enrichment. It really will be able to design to allow students to own their learning, which ties with our second commitment, is that we want students not to be renters of their learning, but rather to be homeowners of their learning. Although there's nothing wrong with renting, I did for several years, but again, we want them to be able to own their learning so that this way they can further explore and develop themselves, and that's that differentiated math. And the WIN, because in education we love acronyms, so as far as whatever I need. When we take a look at the language exploration, students will have the opportunity in 6th grade to explore Spanish, Italian, French, as well as they'll be able to discover world languages and their cultures. So there's 4, they would tie into the different quarters. And this is all from a macro level, and we'll start to now look at a micro level to where we're looking at most students will fall into what we've already discussed. But now we're going to start to look at students where we start to get specifics, and eventually even to they'll come down to individual schedules that students will have a choice with their parents as well as with the support of the counselors to provide that. So students that receive extra services now, there's not room within their schedule if they have a reading or a resource room to be able to take a music. So this new new program will provide them an opportunity to participate in that, as well as the fact that you'll see within that schedule, you'll see in the 8th period slot that there is a reading or a resource room that's built into the schedule. And then they have the opportunity for the math support and the language exploration and or the alternate day of music. And that's a real nice feature and something that we're very pleased about, so that our students will have more opportunities to be exposed to different things. As far as our dual language students, we are very proud of that program coming up out of the Frank P. Long. And if you look at that particular schedule, the dual language students, they have the English language arts as well as the Spanish language arts. They will be receiving the Readers and Writers Workshop within those classes. The Spanish language arts represents is or equivalent to a Spanish language 1, and therefore those students would actually be receiving a language already in 6th grade, and they would be on track to be able to, I won't say track, they'll be on pace for, in 7th grade, taking Spanish 1B, and then they'll be able to take the Checkpoint A exam at the end of 7th grade, earning a high school credit, and then in 8th grade, they can either choose to further that language and or choose an additional language. Also within the dual language students, and I'll talk a little bit more, you'll see down in the 9th period they have, in alternating with the math support, a Computer 1 class, and I'll share how that will work within our dual language students as well as our language exempt students. That new course that would provide them an opportunity, Computers 1 in 6th grade, they would actually take that, and then in 7th grade they would take Computers 2, and then in 8th grade they would actually take Career Financial Management that would make them eligible for a half high school elective credit. So therefore those students would be able to go into high school with additional credits, and then also for our language exempt students, it gives them the opportunity to be able to go into starting their high school career with an elective credit going towards graduation. When you see for the dual language and the language exempt, they don't have that on their particular schedule because in their dual language, they're receiving that in the Spanish language arts class. So they are receiving that within 6th grade. When we take a look at our home language arts students, as far as looking at the entering, emerging, as well as transitioning students, they will have the ENL support in all their core subject areas, as well as a home language arts 6th class, and that will be an every other day class with the math support. And then for our entering and emerging students, they will have an ENL standalone class, and then our transitioning students, they would have the music class for them as well. So this way, we started out in looking at the large scale where the majority of the students will fall into that particular schedule, and then we start to look at the concerns with any of the concerns that would address. Obviously, the more that we look at individual schedules, that's where students and parents, with the support of the counselors, will be able to assist and guide. And this is just an overview of the schedules, but it does address many of the concerns. And I just would also, before I close out, would like to thank, we had, as far as working on this, we had support from the superintendent, Mr. Santana, Assistant Superintendent, Mrs. Doyle, as well as the directors that are here tonight. We have Mrs. Petron, as well as Mrs. O'Hagan, and Mrs. Restivo, and Mrs. Prush, as well as Mr. Burke. From the administrative, building level administration, we have Mr. Latore, as well as Mrs. Calamaris, and joining me tonight, we have Ms. Daniel, who has the joy of putting all this into the master schedule and making sense out of it. So I get to present while all that has already happened. And also we were assisted and accompanied by the 6th grade teachers. We had several meetings here over at central office to where we had a real team opportunity to work together on this, and we really believe that this would be an added addition to our 6th grade students, as well as for the staff and our parents as well. I'd just like to say again, thank you, and we welcome any questions that the board may have.
I have some questions.
Mr. Trent?
Thank you. I apologize if some of them seem silly, but I'm not a teacher and I just need some clarification. But do you need to be a reading teacher to teach the reading classes that you mentioned?
Yes.
You do need to be, okay. So what's, I'm sorry, what was that?
No, I didn't, I thought you were done. Yeah.
What's the difference between reading and the reading workshop classes?
It's a reading is a support class, and the readers is for all students, but the actual reading classes are is additional support.
Okay. And that reading class, you need to be a reading teacher to teach it?
I believe yes, you asked that question, and again, it all depends on what the needs are. If it's that's so, I don't want to be locked into just. It all depends on what the students' needs are. Students coming up, we haven't made those adjustments and projections, but overall, yes, that's what we're looking to do. But it all depends on what the needs of the students are, as well as the staff that we have available to assist those students.
Just a quick elaboration on what he said. Typically, ELA is broken up into 2 periods in 6th grade, reading and writing. So instead of taking 1 English class, you take 2 in 6th grade. So there's a reading component, which is literacy, and there's a writing component. And that's what you see reading and writing, whereas like the reading support is more of a remediation.
So it'd still be our Teachers College Reading and Writing Workshop curriculum.
Okay. And then what is the difference between computer, like what is computer 1 and computer 2? What would they be learning in that class?
Introductory and moving, 1 starting out and then 2 that they're moving forward.
But is it like how to use a computer, or is it, because this is the first time I'm seeing a computer 1 or computer 2.
Say that again?
Like what does a curriculum look like? Are they learning how to use a computer, or are they learning like how to use like Microsoft or Excel?
I could get back to you on that as far as, I don't know off the top of my head as far as all the components, as far as all the lessons that are built into that. So we can get back to you on that.
Okay.
So computers is a course that runs in 7th and 8th grade right now. The 1 is more like keyboarding.
Okay.
And then 2 goes into deeper, like how to use Microsoft Word and how to use the program.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
they run currently in 7th and 8th, so we'd be moving it up for these dual language students, and those that are exempted, so they take it earlier than
Gotcha.
other students might take it before.
Okay. And
Get
so.
back to you sooner than.
If I can. So is this kind of schedule modeled from something else, or did you guys just create it from scratch?
We worked on it together. I'm not sure if it was modeled from another district or somewhere else, as far as what we were able to look at as far as the needs of the students, and this is what we were able to put together.
Thank you.
I see your
You're
hand,
welcome.
but you
Good
remember
question.
her hand popped up?
Yeah,
Before.
I caught it on camera in there. Just a quick question about the WIN, the Whatever I Need with the math. You said it was for remediation and for enrichment.
Yes.
Does every student in 6th grade take that, even those middle of the road
Yes.
math students? So everybody will have that additional math component?
Yes.
And is that on, and forgive me, I know it was probably explained up there, is that on a weekly basis or on a daily basis?
Every other day.
Every other day, okay. Thank you, Dr.
You're welcome.
Trustee Barry.
So it sounds to me like it's giving greater options, which I think is always an exciting thing, and obviously to meet the needs of the students. My question really is, in terms of how to roll that out, you've got students who are coming from a different school into this school, trying to identify what supports or what enrichments they are going to need. Can you elaborate in terms of, how that works between the 2 schools to try and make sure that the 6th graders are getting the benefit that I see?
Are you asking specifically about the WIN class?
I'm asking, there's a lot of options. It sounds to me like there's a lot of options. How does a student or how does that student get either guided or the option to choose? Is it based on their performance in 5th grade and then it's determined that they would need this type of assistance? Or is it a situation where they come into a meeting at the middle school and look at, okay, this is how I performed and do that? Or is it really start in the 5th grade?
So it depends. It depends. So for the students who are receiving reading services, there's several conversations that we had, and based off of their benchmarking, they're placed into the appropriate section. In terms of the WIN class, and Mr. Burke can elaborate as our director for that, the math students will be working with their actual math teacher, and the teacher will decide using the data what type of extensions they're receiving in one class, whether it be enrichment or whether it be remediation. The other sections that we had already mentioned are for every student. So when you look at the Discovering the Languages, every child will take one of those classes based off the level of quarter. So what we did is we worked with BOCES to change our system, so every marking period, a student will have access to a different language. And Mr. Burke, if you want to elaborate on WIN, by all means.
In the WIN class, the students will be grouped together with the same math class that they would be in. So whatever teacher and the group of students that they have in their math class, that would also be who they are in with their WIN class, okay? So that teacher knows who those students are, that teacher knows the performance of the students from being in the math class. During the WIN class, there will be things for, again, designed as whatever I need, okay? And so if a student does need that extra support, a student needs remediation, if a student is ready for the enrichment, our current program, Math in Focus, has those materials already as a part of the program, so teachers will be able to utilize those. We are utilizing at the elementary level the IXL program to help teachers and students with practicing math skills that is based on their level of readiness. We will be extending that into the 6th grade next year as well, and so that will be a part of that WIN program experience too. So the students will be having the support in whatever way that support really needs, and that will be determined through things like their performance in their math class and the data that we are gathering through the IXL program.
Thank you. Also at the same time as whatever I need or whatever is needed by me is going to be the interesting thing if it is to move forward as to how that is assigned or selected.
And the,
If you want to elaborate on that, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, the other piece, the other part of this is that the incoming 6th graders, this is what they know. It's not a matter of they won't know, they're gonna be able to transition in, and as far as the whatever I need, it's in consultation with the teacher, having parent involvement as well as the students, so that there is that ability for them to grow and work together. So it's not just simply showing up and then as far as students making the decisions on their own. It's a growing process.
So is this a move back to secondary scheduling as well, right? No more block scheduling? They're gonna change every class.
They would, yes.
So are we sure, we're confident that the building transition isn't going to, and changing classes isn't going to hamper the education? 'Cause that was the problem in the past, right? That's why we went back to block scheduling, right? It became a little much and overwhelming for 6th graders coming to a new school, very difficult time in their lives, everything's changing, middle school's tough, and now, we've seen kids struggle getting from class to class, whereas the block scheduling gave a more consistent, uninterrupted time for teaching. So, where are we with that? Like, I'm a little nervous about it.
So I'm very excited about that proposition, being a former middle school principal like Dr. Colson. The idea is, as kids develop and they grow, sitting in one classroom for 3 periods really kind of is counter to their ability to sort of sustain their energy. And this is a really simplified way of kind of expressing it. That leads to some management concerns because these kids are together for an extended period of time. And what I want to emphasize is that the students are still going to be housed in their wing of the building. It just gives them a break every 40 minutes, which, kids these days need breaks. And even when we talk about classroom instruction, gone are the days where kids can sit for an entire instructional period and just listen. It just doesn't happen anymore. In my former high school, we used to talk about delivering instruction in like 10-minute chunks. So I think this is going to kind of lend itself actually to better decorum for the students, less acting out in class, and also an ability for those students to intermingle with other kids in the grade, because they're basically spending a half day in one classroom with the same cohort of kids, and then another half with the same cohort of kids. So I think just in my experience, spending almost half my career in middle school, I've never worked in a middle school that had block scheduling. And so when we look at, some of the feedback from teachers, that was just it. Being and it works for elementary school because that's the model, that's what they're used to. But even in elementary schools, they're changing activities all the time. And there's movement. They're not at desks, they're at centers, they're at reading centers, they move around. And I do think that it's going to have the opposite effect. I think it's going to help with the decorum of the building and also the engagement in class because they're switching the teacher on a period-by-period basis. That's going to keep their kind of interest peaked. I didn't mean to speak for you, but...
Thank you. The only thing I was going to add to what was already shared is my 7 years at the middle school, each year, teachers have said that they've been ready for this. Students are ready for this. And it really, because the bells ring every 41 minutes. So the students, it's kind of odd for the students not to move. And where teachers have to, again, manage through the passing periods, where students are, that they, the whole bell system is on, the whole school would be on one model, a secondary model, and students would be able to move throughout the building. And then, as Mr. Santana was sharing, is that there would still be pretty much a 6th grade wing for the students. The students are moving, as well as the teachers are moving as well, so that they can be able to have the best experience. And but like I said, I've listened to teachers for 7 years since being here, beginning my career principalship, and they've been advocating for this type of structure within the schedule.
So then how do we prepare them in 5th grade? I'm sorry.
Just to add to that, sorry, I'm hitting down here.
That's okay.
There still will be a teaming structure, so there'll be, teams of teachers working with groups of students, so there's still a team that will know your child, and that WIN class is taught by your math teacher, so you still will have 2 periods with that math teacher every other day. So it's not just like we're throwing you into 7th grade and 6th grade. There still are these supports built in to have that smooth transition, to have them build up to that secondary model.
So how do we prepare kids for this in 5th grade? Or do we just hope they figure it out?
I don't think it's a hope. Again, from my experience, kids are amazing and they transition. That's always been a parent concern. When I had my parent orientations as a middle school principal, there was always concern about 2 things: opening lockers and moving from class to class. And I remember kids would visit the building and be panicked and withdraw maps. And within, I wouldn't say a day or 2, it was like they're always there. And they feel more mature. They feel like there is a change. It's not more of the same. I do think that a lot of parents get nervous anytime a kid transitions from elementary school to middle school for obvious reasons. And also that transition from middle school to high school is a scary proposition because in high school, 9th graders are with the big bad seniors.
Sure.
But it's never been, in my experience, and I don't know if Dr. Colson would say, it's never been sort of a bone of contention or anxiety-producing sort of experience. Kids really adapt really fast.
So then I guess the last question is, I'm losing my train of thought. Can we see, and I know it's budget time, no rush after the budget sometime before the end of the year. I gotta think that there's data from building to building transition and how our students are managing that transition, right? That shouldn't be too hard to put together, or?
What type of data are you looking for?
Student performance from grade to grade, from building to building transition, right? Are the students staying on level from 5th grade to 6th grade? Is there a drop off or is there an increase? I'm just going back to, when we had significant changes 12 years ago, when I was maybe on the board a year. One of the biggest issues for the new administration was the transition from building to building and the decrease in student performance when they moved to another building. Do we have any data that can support one way or the other that, and I'm not asking you to just kind of dig stuff up, but I have to think we look at how our grades are doing from one to the next to see if.
So I'm going to give a quick answer, and just based on my experience as both middle school principal and high school principal. Typically, the kids who struggle the most are the transitioning kids. That's said in any model. And so what I recall my experiences as a high school principal for 7 years, it was always the 9th graders that struggled a bit because high school just feels different. And I don't really recall there being problems in 6th grade. I think it's hard to quantify that because there's so many variables that affect student performance. If you do a year-to-year comparison, it's different because the kids are kind of assessed and measured in so many different ways. In the secondary school model, where they're getting grades from all the different subjects, whereas elementary school is kind of a more holistic approach. So if we're talking about like reading levels or math levels, maybe you can compare and contrast data. But I'll certainly give it thought.
I mean, I'm sure, like, we have a lot of benchmark tests and state tests and things like that. I'm sure there's data that can, am I wrong? I mean, I'm not an educator, so somebody tell me, Chris, you're nuts, you know what you're talking about. Is there data that we can extrapolate to analyze building to building transition?
There is, but it's the last 3 years, to me, is not reliable.
That's a good
Because of the
point.
pandemic. So we could use the NWA, which, you know, we use K-8, but it's not really gonna tell us.
Would you say last year to this year is it better? I mean, I know you can't go back 3 years, but, I mean, I guess I would think I guess you're right.
And I think it's hard to say, was it the transition? Is it the summer off? Is it, you know, there's a lot of other factors that go into, it's a new curriculum that the student's learning. Some students may progress, some students may not. I think when I'm hearing your concerns, I think I was looking for, we do have a 5th grade orientation where we bring students up from Frank P. Long. They get to walk through the school. That would be a nice opportunity for us to share with the students. And then we have a parent meeting at night to where we can share with the parents, and that's in May. That gives the students still time to finish out 5th grade, still have fun. I always encourage them, you're not at the middle school yet. It's, you know, enjoy 5th grade, have that, continue to walk around the halls nice and tall. And, but when they come up to the building in 6th grade, they could actually hear more about, and that'll be another opportunity for us to address and answer concerns and make ourselves available for the incoming parents that may have any additional questions once they hear that. So that's something that is happening, that happened in May. I think the timing of this is excellent, that we're having this discussion now. And then, like I said, I'm looking over at Ms. Daniel, who will have some fun putting this all together and making some sense out of this. But I really believe it's a great opportunity. It's an added value for our students to be able to, especially to have that math support, you know, where, and like I said, it will be differentiated, to be able to have the language exploration in 6th grade, to where normally we've tried many different, we've tried push-in, having the world language teachers push into the 6th grade classrooms, we've had videos, but this is now they have an opportunity to really spend a quarter exploring and to be able to make a better decision with their parents' support and help, as well as with the counselors, so that in 7th grade they're really identifying and making that strong choice of the language that they're going to explore. We took into account the dual language program, which is allowing them to progress, and then at the same point for our English language learners, as well as students that are language exempt, giving them an opportunity to walk out of the middle school with a high school, half a high school credit, or if not more. So it's a real added opportunity for our students, as well as for our parents and community, that allows our students to propel into high school and to really have a great high school experience.
The last thing I'll say on that, and I appreciate the end there, right, because that kind of is part of my point. And you're all educators, you say this is what we need to do, you know, I can't really refute it. But as a parent, one of the concerns, and I've seen it in education for probably the last 10 years, there is this effort to mature kids faster than they're capable of. 6th grade is still elementary school. And the fact that it's housed in a middle school is still kind of crazy to me, and I know that's just the way it is. But, you know, listen, there's funding coming out in the budget for 3-year-old programs. You know, more money for pre-K. Everything's just earlier. And, you know, 3-year-old kids don't belong in a school, in my opinion. They should be playing on the floor with toys and watching, you know, SpongeBob, whatever else they do at 3 years old. But I just kind of feel like the same thing goes with 6th grade. And I get it, but I don't ever really want to be the type of parent, and my kids are done, so I don't have to deal with this, that talks about hoping my kids come out of middle school with high school or college credits, because I really want them to have an experience, and it's an important part of their time, of their lives, and it's a difficult time in their lives, and there's a lot of distractions. And I think when we look at the level of distractions that kids have now, devices, social medias, and all those different things, the internet, It's just harder to be a kid, in my opinion, and I know some people don't agree with that. But I go back to my original thing. I always am concerned about too much too soon. That's all.
I was gonna say, the nice thing just to comment on that, that I see is, it also can be pivoted well to provide assistance to those kids who need that.
No, I get that. I'm not even talking about those
Yeah.
programs seem awesome, like, right? They're providing support and giving an opportunity for kids who can achieve more to advance. I get it, that's great, I really do. My thing is really just the scheduling and how that works. I can sit here in a year from now and eat my words in 2-3 years, and that certainly is possible. I have complete faith in the administration and what you all think should happen. I just know from a parent's perspective, that's my concern. And it started at the very beginning of the reform agenda, right? Trying to mandate pre-K when kindergarten's not even mandated, right? It's all about earlier and earlier. So with the state piloting 3-year-old programs, it kind of all is the same topic for me, but we'll see. I'm done.
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
The first is more of a comment. The math support that you mentioned is very appealing to me. And I'm assuming this fits nicely with the new math classes, or the way that, I'm looking at Mr. Berg here, because he'd done the presentation about the math class progressions. And this sounds to me like it would fit well with that.
We want to make sure that students at the 6th grade level do receive the support that will allow us to do exactly what you're saying, so that they will be prepared for this progression to high school experience that they get to, by making sure that if they need that remediation or that extra help, that they are receiving that. The ones who are ready for more, that they're receiving that, because that is a piece that we definitely believe is an area of growth for the kids, is that enrichment piece. And so I'm excited that we'll be putting that particular piece in place so that those kids who are just ready to soar with that, they'll have those opportunities too.
Thank you so much for that. And with regard to the music, just to preface my question about it, I was relieved to hear you say that the 6th graders would still be in the same wing, even though they'll be moving between the class segments. Is that true for music as well? Will that be done over in the 6th grade wing?
In the music, yes, in the music rooms as well.
Music room's already over there.
It's in there.
Yeah.
All right, geographically
It works.
deficient here, so
That's okay.
thank you for answering that. Okay.
And I also want to say, this is the typical model for middle school.
Mhm.
You know, our kind of model is an anomaly. And it was one of the things I noticed when I first started, and right away, I don't know how it spawned, but as Dr. Colson indicated, teachers have been sort of asking for this change for a very long time now. And it made sense to me just based on my own middle school experience, working both as a teacher and as an administrator.
So that too gave me some comfort to hear that the educators that work with our kids every day have thought this was a good model to try.
And I totally agree with you. School needs to be fun. I say it all the time. Kids need to be kids. Close your ears, Dr. Colson. When I was a principal back in Port Jefferson Middle School, I tried to get my teachers to stop issuing homework. And because I felt that the demands and the pressure were too much. Kids should be able to go home and have fun and play and do all those things kids do. And then above and beyond schoolwork, a lot of kids are, participate in youth leagues, sports. They're so subscribed to activities that we almost limit their opportunity to be kids. So again, this doesn't change, I think, the atmosphere of the school. It changes just the structure and allows for them to have a little bit more movement and engage in more fun activities and choice. And I just want to compliment the team. Today we're talking about staffing, and when I talk about administrative staffing and directors, you absolutely demonstrated what I mean about the important roles all of you play. Because all of you lend a little bit of expertise, whether it's STEM, math and science, guidance, special education, master scheduling, humanities, E&L, and world languages, and of course Beth Doyle, who's at the helm of all this, providing her leadership. I really thought it was a wonderful sort of just demonstration of the team effort, and of course our BTA and the teachers who participated as well. It was just a fantastic sort of process that's been ongoing for the majority of the year. So I just want to give the proper credit to everyone involved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
You want the keyboard?
My night's not done. I'm about to get to the must-see portion of our budget, of our board meeting, the budget presentation. So, are we ready,
Yes, you're
Vice
up.
President Hayes?
You're up.
All right. Let's go. Take some water. Yeah, take care. Up right there. All right, I'm going to begin. So it gives me great pleasure to present our 5th budget presentation. And I just noticed, make a quick correction. As I said, as many times as we proofread this is our 5th presentation. So I want to be accurate. There we go. So right now we're up to our 5th budget presentation, which is again an expenditure review. Expenditures, of course, are expenses or costs, and today we're going to be talking about our staffing analysis. A staffing analysis speaks about all the wonderful people who work for our school district and our proposals for staffing for the upcoming school year. Let me begin by reminding the Board of Trustees and the public that the budget process is an ongoing process. And right now, we're in our 5th presentation. We're going to be talking about our staffing analysis. And then in April is when we're going to review where we're at and sort of an update, to provide an update on our expenses, our expenditures, and our revenues. So today, we're not there yet. Like I said, the budget process is ongoing. We're keeping we're working at it, making modifications as we learn more and more about our budget and we start solidifying the information. So today we talk about staffing analysis. Next time around, we're going to give an update on our expenses and revenues, which ultimately leads to our budget adoption on April 19th. And of course, our budget hearing is scheduled for May 3rd, right here in our district office, with our budget vote and election on May 16th. In terms of budget process timeline, right now we're currently in between March and April. Staffing requests have been verified through projected enrollment. These are at the secondary level. It's a student course requests, and also at the middle school, and in large part is based on enrollment at the elementary schools. And then in April, we get to the the finish line where we start finalizing our budget, and we ultimately present the budget to be hopefully adopted by the Board of Trustees. Quick recap, and I'm going to go through these slides very quickly. Again, just in terms of providing an educational approach to this, there are different considerations that we make in developing a budget. There's administrative considerations. We consider the actual budget process and the approach we take in developing a budget. And of course, we decide on the budgeting strategy. But the most important part of this all is gathering information. And I said it in 3 words: consulting, reaching out to colleagues and professionals in other school districts and the state level to help give us guidance and help with our decision making. And this includes, of course, feedback from the Board of Trustees and our stakeholders. As part of one of our first budget presentations, we spoke about our long-term planning and what we're doing to mitigate some of the challenges that lie ahead. In terms of challenges, I talk about, of course, the inflation and our tax calculation. If you recall, during my presentation earlier during the session, I talked about refit and how they're talking about the tax cap calculation. Federal grants period end date next year. Our federal grant revenue will end. And that's a challenge that's being faced by all school districts across Long Island and New York State, as well as by our New York State government. And the challenge that's unique to us is the differential in building aid or state aid and our bond payments that lie ahead. In order to mitigate some of these challenges, again, we're going to continually review our programs and looking at our budget to make reductions wherever possible. We have to engage in more capital improvement projects, not because, or more importantly, because our buildings and our facilities need it. They're long overdue, and the school community benefits from capital improvements, but capital improvements also generate revenue. Right now, the school district works at a 76.2 reimbursement rate for capital projects. And some of the things that we've already done, we already had a capital reserve vote in October, which authorized us to use $2.6 million of our capital reserve to engage in enhancements to our security system and the installation of a new turf field. And I'm happy to report that we're hoping to break ground on the turf field this summer and have it functional for the start of the school year. So we've already gone through the bidding process, so we're really moving at an accelerated pace, and I'm really pleased with that, because as soon as those projects are complete, we'll submit our final cost analysis to the state and hopefully start generating some of that building aid. We also are contracting with Energia, which is an energy performance contract company. They do basically capital improvements at sort of in a budget neutral manner, and the projects are sort of paid for by guaranteed savings that are guaranteed by the actual organization. Based on initial projections, we may be able to engage in $5.6 million worth of capital improvements through this contract that again is going to be budget neutral. This also generates building aid at a different rate, 66.4 or 2, but still it's aidable, and again it's budget neutral. We also recommended the inclusion of a capital transfer budget line to our budget, allowing us to do capital improvements on an annual basis. And we've had this conversation, we have to contemplate future bond proposals. Right now, the climate for it, in terms of interest rates, is not optimal, but we may get to that point when we look at our building condition survey and say, hey, the time is right to engage in some sort of larger scale capital improvements. Ongoing exploration of alternative revenue sources, donations, grants, etc. Today we had the good fortune of having the South Country Education Foundation here. So anything that we can do to help subsidize some of our expenditures, we will continually work on to obtain. And of course, strategic use of revenues to the extent possible. The use of revenues is mandated by state law, and the idea is you use reserves and you fund the reserves in a sort of manner that keeps the reserves pretty static. You did get to points in sort of the trajectory where you're going to use the reserves more and you see a little dip in the reserve balances. The idea is it's kind of like a roller coaster. They go up and down, but the idea is to keep them stable and healthy. We also talked about the tax cap and revenue overview. As I mentioned, the tax cap is based on an 8-part formula that's somewhat complicated, which yields the tax cap or tax levy limit. For our school district, our tax levy limit was calculated at 4.64%, which includes the capital transfer line in that budget. Had we not included the capital transfer line, the tax cap would have been 3.12%, which is a thematic element I'll revisit in later budget presentations. What I want to emphasize, and what was captured in this latest article that came out of Newsday just yesterday, is that we're not intending to ask the community or propose a 4.64 tax levy on our community. On March 1st, we are obligated to provide the state what our tax cap limit calculation will be. And really the safest approach is to provide that same number as our intended tax levy. The reason I say the safest number is because at that point in time, during March 1st, we're pretty much halfway through the budget process, and we want to be sort of informed when we propose a tax levy. Even if it's an estimate, we didn't feel comfortable making an estimate at that time. So we basically use the same number as the tax cap limit as our intended tax levy, but we're not going to be proposing, and I say this with confidence, a 4.6 tax levy coming up. And we'll learn more about that as the budget process continues. But yet, our tax cap limit was published in Newsday, and I just wanted to clarify that that's just sort of a benchmark number. And when we develop our budget, we're not using that as sort of a benchmark to work backwards from. We're putting together a budget that will certainly ensure the operations of our school districts, keep our district in a financial stable position so that we can help mitigate future challenges and certainly maintain our programs. I'll talk about that a little later. In terms of revenue, we're going to be revisiting revenue at our April 5th meeting. We're still getting updates on our school aid and other revenue sources. We'll have a more detailed update April 5th. But just to recap, about half of our revenue comes from the tax levy, about 40% from state aid. Other revenue, which includes rental properties and things like that, are included, in our revenue, and then we have the appropriated fund balance that's used as a revenue source to help balance the budget. We then spoke about the 1,000, 5,000, and 9,000 codes. And basically, these codes all represent different revenues, actually expenditures, and include function, object, and location in terms of the numbers used for the codes. But basically, the 1,000 code are all the costs associated with the general administration and operation of the school district. The 5,000 code speaks to transportation, A to Z. And finally, the 9,000 code is related to employee benefits, government obligations, and debt payments. And again, I know I'm going quick, but we kind of discussed this at length. I'm trying to provide a quick recap of things that were discussed. Just to show you where we're at during that presentation, we were looking at an increase of about a little over $1 million, almost $2 million at that point in the budget process. And as you'll see, these numbers will continually change as we dig deeper into our budget and we look for efficiencies. But again, these budgeted expenditures at that time are projected. And again, one of the biggest increases as indicated in this chart at that time was the addition of the capital transfer line for $1 million in the 9,000 codes. Our next budget presentation spoke toward the 2,000 code, which is curriculum instruction. Curriculum is basically what's taught in our schools. Instruction is how the curriculum is delivered. And we basically organize the 2,000 code in three different sort of categories. We have the general education classroom, which includes special programs, student support outside of special education, all of the contracts, materials, and supplies associated with providing instruction. We also categorize it by our special education programs, including instruction, support services, tuition to special programs, contracts, and materials and supplies as required by law. And finally, we separate it into all of our extracurricular activities district-wide, including our interscholastic athletics, intramurals, and of course our clubs. Here's another sort of review of our codes and where we're at in terms of expenditures. This again are projected expenditures, and during this point in our budget presentations, we're looking at overall expenditures at $143 million. And you'll see at the end of tonight's presentation, that number has been further modified. Again, the budgeted expenditures are projected, are going to change, as I just mentioned. Increases tend to reflect inflation and rising costs and fuel, supplies, entitlements, and benefits, which are things that are out of our control. And again, the addition of the intrafund transfer line in the 9,000 codes accounts for that big majority of that increase in that line. So I want to emphasize that there are still 4 weeks left of the budget process, and the preceding figures in this chart are going to continue to change as we dig deep into our budget and continue our analysis. You'll see a difference at the end of this presentation. Today we're talking about staffing and our staffing analysis. So what are the essential questions? First, what are the various functions that are carried out by our staff? We'll talk a little bit about that. Second, what is a full-time equivalent, an FTE? We're going to be talking about FTEs throughout this whole entire presentation, and I thought it was important for not just the trustees to know, but our community to know what FTEs are and how it's applied to school staffing. What considerations were given when determining our staffing? And finally, how do staffing projections affect expenditures? So first we can get to the question about what is a full-time equivalent, an FTE, and how is it applied to school staffing? Well, a full-time equivalent basically is a full-time employee. It's that simple. And it's based on a whole number one, which I'll talk about in a second. Not all employees are considered FTEs. Some are stipend-driven positions like club advisors, athletic coaches don't fall into these categories because they receive stipends. So they're not going to fall into the staffing analysis. That's held in the 2000 codes, and we spoke about those expenditures in a prior presentation. So the FTE is based on the number 1, 1.0, or a whole. FTEs can be denoted as a decimal as follows. A 0.5 FTE means an employee works half the usual expectation, and a 0.2 FTE means an employee works 20% of the usual expectation. Sometimes you'll see this split as follows. Staff may work part-time or be split amongst the buildings. So for example, we may have a teacher that's split between the middle school and the high school. So when we talk about staffing, that employee is considered a 0.5 FTE or a 0.5 middle school FTE and a 0.5 FTE at the high school. So the employee themselves is a full-time employee split between two buildings. And the reason we do it this way is because you have to sort of capture the staff in our respective buildings, so we can do cost analysis, and it also gives us an indication of what our programs cost us. To that end, staff may also be split by department. If you're a teacher, for example, that has dual certification and works in two different content areas, the example I'm using here, you could be a 0.4 FTE&L teacher and a 0.6 English language arts teacher. That's a very common dual certification to have because we want to see how much staffing we allocate to the various departments. So again, this person would be a full-time employee. We also have part-timers, and we characterize part-timers based on FTEs. So when we look at our schedule, our master schedule, sometimes the need for a science teacher doesn't work out the whole numbers. The high school may need 10.2 science teachers. That 0.2 may be covered by a teacher as an overage, or it may be a part-timer that you hire at 0.2 of their salary, and then the rest of their 0.8, they'll work as a substitute teacher. That's kind of a common practice. Those salaries are each prorated differently. The 0.2 teaching component is based on a teaching salary, or 20% of that salary, and then the 0.8 comes out of a substitute salary. And that's how that's broken down. And it's even further broken down at the secondary level because teachers teach 5 periods a day. Each class that meets on a daily basis is a 0.2. So if you teach 5 classes, you're a 1.0 FTE. If you classes that meet on alternating days or for half the year are considered a 0.1 FTE, not a 0.01 FTE, if I had a little typo. And so, for example, a physical education teacher can teach up to 10 sections a year because gym meets on an alternating day schedule. So on day A, they'll have 5 classes. On day B, they'll have 5 different classes, each of which is a 0.1, which adds up to a 1.0. If you're a subject teacher, like a science teacher, and who has a lab on an alternating day, each class you have is a 0.3 assignment, 0.2 for the lecture, 0.1 for the lab component. So that's just kind of an explanation of how FTEs work. Next, we want to talk a little bit about functional activity. First, we have, and this is kind of how we break it down, just in terms of clarity when we present our staffing projections. We have a central office, which is basically responsible for the overall operations of the district, included but not limited to myself as a superintendent collaborating with the Board of Trustees, certainly our compliance with SED mandates, civil service, school law, and everything that goes into the operation of a school district. This is where we'll find myself, the assistant superintendents, in large part our cabinet. A mixture of administration and support is also found in district, but also at the building level. And this includes both our district and building administration, who is charged with carrying out the functions of the school district, including all of the aforementioned. So they'll be supporting instruction, as you saw tonight. We have directors in the office and building administrators working collaboratively with Ms. Doyle, for example, who's in charge with curriculum instruction. So that's the next category by which we break our staffing down. Next are our elementary schools. This includes all staff, kindergarten to 5th grade, including our preschool center at South Haven. And this includes all teachers, support staff, mental health professionals, guidance, and instructional coaches. We have our secondary schools, which includes all staff, 6th grade through 12th grade, which includes all teachers, support staff, mental health professionals, guidance, and instructional coaches, much like our elementary schools. And finally, we have non-instructional staff that we categorize at a district level, even though they work for the various buildings. And this includes everything from teaching assistants to safety officers to nurses and to our maintenance crew. And so we're going to be presenting each of these categories in terms of what our staffing is currently and what we project it to be in the upcoming school year. In making these determinations, there are different considerations that we make. First and foremost, we want to ensure that the proposed staffing is sustainable, considering challenging moving forward. One of the risks that I don't want to take as a superintendent, and certainly I want the school district to take, is implementing or adopting new staff that we're not going to be able to maintain. That's just not good for the district, and it's not good for the kids to sort of implement programs that are not sustainable moving forward. So we have to be conscientious of that. Second, we want to make sure that academic achievement as well as social and emotional needs are met and supported through our staffing projections. We want to maintain overall class sizes across the district. And then use this as a separate category because we all talk about sort of the adverse effects of the pandemic. We're very fortunate to have relatively small class size in our school district when you compare us to other school districts across the island. I think that's a benefit to us that we want to try to maintain for as long as possible. We want to maintain and potentially enhance academic and extracurricular activities. You heard a little presentation for the middle school today, which I'll speak to a little later. But certainly, if we could find room to enhance the experiences or learning experiences of our students, we want to do so. Obviously, we want to be in compliance with special education and state regulations and mandates. And finally, we want to consider the overall budget when potentially adding staff, identifying reductions in other areas. For every give, there's got to be a take, and that's how we've been trying to balance sort of our approach to budgeting for the upcoming school year. So we're going to start with central office. Sort of these photos capture all the things we do, from presentations from Ms. Doyle to community involvement, professional development by Mr. Briggs. There's a picture there you may not be able to see of Ms. McGee working on a Saturday. A picture with myself and the Commissioner of Schools, Dr. Rosa, who will be speaking to school boards. And of course, our board engaged in a board retreat that I facilitate in my collaboration. So there are 13.5 positions. The 0.5, we just talked about FTEs, is our driver or our messenger that delivers our mail. That person is actually a full-time employee that's split between maintenance and his courier function. But this is basically all of our district level employees that we count in this sort of calculation. We're not presenting or proposing any changes to our district administration. That will stay static. Next, we have administration and support staff, which includes central office staff and our building administration and directors. I'm sorry, not building administration. Correct. Our building administration, I apologize. What's highlighted in yellow are additions. And on this page, we're proposing a 1.6 FTE increase. The 1.0 increase includes a director of technology. We've spoken about that. We've posted for the position. This is extremely important for our school district because that person will be charged with cybersecurity, data protection, is going to support our instructional technology and all the different sort of platforms we use to promote our curriculum. We'll provide professional learning to our staff, and we'll draft a technology plan that we need to sort of operate moving forward. This is a critical position for all these aforementioned reasons. We're also proposing increasing our restorative coach to a full-time position. Right now, we only currently allot of 0.4 FTE for that purpose. The needs of the restorative coach are growing, and we want to expand the service to multiple buildings. And in order to do that, we really want to make this a full-time position so that we can start sort of engaging restorative practices, which includes professional learning for other staff members and supporting our professional practices, K-12. So that 0.6 increase represents someone who's doing this 40% of the time, increasing to someone doing it 100% of the time. So that's where it's a 0.6. So for this sort of category, all-inclusive, this represents a 1.6 FTE increase. Next, we get to our elementary school staffing, starting with South Haven. If you look at our current enrollment, we are able to offer 7 sections. That's based on the facility. That's not going to change. We don't have enrollment numbers yet, but year after year, our South Haven Center gets fully sort of registered, and we typically have offered 7 sections. We don't expect that to change, and hence we're not proposing any staffing changes at South Haven. Next, we have Brookhaven Elementary School. There are no projected changes to the current staffing based on the enrollment. The enrollment seems to be pretty static. It's a decline of 8 students. This is based on March enrollment. Obviously, these numbers can change as more families move into the district or move out of the district. Sometimes you have an influx of families in the summer. And obviously, we have to make adjustments should these things happen. But right now, based on our current projections and enrollment, we're going to keep the staffing at Brookhaven the same. If you note, we're increasing the amount of sections in general education by 1 section, as well as adding a special class, but we're reducing one of the integrated sections. This equates to a 0 net change in staffing because the integrated section is co-taught. It represents 2 teachers. To reduce a section in integrated co-teaching, that's 2 FTEs down, and then we're increasing 2 FTEs in the other areas. The net change is 0. Moving on to Kramer, or Kramer Kingdom. We're looking at a 2.0 FTE increase due to enrollment. If you look at third grade, the enrollment in third grade is going to go up from 51 students to 70 students next year. And again, we want to maintain our class sizes as they are. We're also adding a special class, that's a special education class that meets the needs, students with special needs and IEPs to help better meet their needs. And again, to keep these students in our district. We want to sort of decrease the amount of students that are sent out of district because again, these children are a part of our community and we want them to be involved in our schools. Kramer right now is showing a 2.0 FTE increase, again, due to the enrollment and due to the addition of a special class based on careful analysis. On the other hand, Vernon W. Kritz Elementary School is showing a 2.0 FTE projected decrease. So those two kind of cancel each other out, even though they're in different buildings. The decrease is due to enrollment, the size of, we're going to be offering 4 sections. There's an increase in third grade, but a decrease in second grade. And if you look at the class sizes, we're still keeping the class sizes at a manageable rate, even with those additions. And the loss of the special class is the class that's going to be moving to Kramer. So recall from the last slide, there's an increase in the special class in Kramer, but a decrease, I'm correct. An increase of a special class at Kramer Elementary School, and a decrease here because we want to house all of our special classes in one building. That helps us support those classes in a more efficient way, and it's better for the students and staff involved. Next, we go up to our intermediate school, which is technically an elementary school, Frank P. Long. We have no proposed staffing changes at Frank P. Long. If you look on the slide, we are reducing one of our general education classes by 1 section while maintaining nice class sizes, but we're also adding a dual language class as the dual language kids move up during their sort of trajectory through our schools. That's a net zero change for those classes, so there is no proposed staffing increases at Frank P. Long. So again, just to summarize, all of our core academics and our proposed staffing for next year at the elementary school level, there are no proposed staffing because the increases in one school negate the decreases in the other school, so our staffing remains constant at the elementary school in terms of core academics. And again, if you look, these are the number of sections and teachers and FTEs. And if we look at our specials and support, again, we can maintain our programs where they are with no projected staffing changes. This just captures all of our different categories from art, music, PE, E&L, our library specialists, reading coaches, speech guidance, social workers, psychologists, and our math specialists. So we're going to keep those things static, so there is no projected changes to staff. So a summary of all of our buildings, again, we have 109 FTEs, which we project to remain static for the upcoming school year. There are no changes there. The enrollment is somewhat static in our elementary schools, but we'll see, what the future holds. Again, enrollment is something we have no control over as as families move in and out of our learning community. Moving now to secondary school enrollment. This is where we're seeing a little bit of a drop in enrollment amongst the 2 schools. If we look at Bellport Middle School, our enrollment will be down by 43 students, and at the high school, our enrollment will be down by 79 students. I do want to call special attention to our 6th and 7th grade current classes. This is a trend that started across Long Island during the pandemic, moving out of district, and school districts across the island are seeing a reduction in enrollment. At the secondary level, something that's kind of counterintuitive that I wanted to point out is that a drop in enrollment doesn't necessarily mean a drop in staffing. One of the things we're trying to do at the high school level is offer more courses so that students have less study halls. In my prior sort of capacity as a high school principal, my enrollment in my prior high school was static the 7 years I was there. It varied within 50 students. However, my staffing went up by 20 FTEs, which sounds remarkable. But when I first started at the high school, I realized that I had students who had 2 to 3 free periods a day, and you can still be aligned to graduate because you need 22 credits to graduate, so you have to take like 7 1/4 credits a year to hit the 22. Actually, no, less than that. It's 7 times 3 is 21. You're in high school for 4 years, so you do the math. So students can theoretically have free periods, and we have free periods in the form of study halls. This decreases the opportunity for students to earn credits toward graduation. So how do you mitigate that? You offer electives, you offer fun courses that earn some course credit, provides more of an experience for them, and keeps them from having multiple free periods. We want our credits to graduate with 28 to 30 credits at the end of 4 years. So that's why sometimes, even though enrollment may go down, the staffing increases, which is a good thing because kids are taking more courses. And enrollment, however, when you look at those numbers for our current 6th and 7th grade, when they finally get to the high school, may impact staffing projections moving forward. So I just wanted to say that, not to cause any alarm, because the more courses we offer, the more options we have our students, the more we'll be able to secure graduation for these students, and certainly secure our staff and maintain our programs. So there is the enrollment for both schools respectively. I'm going to start talking about Bell Park Middle School and their core academics. We just saw a presentation based upon the restructuring of our 6th grade. That basically involves a 2.6 FTE increase to our current staffing, again, due to the restructuring of 6th grade. 1.0 FTE comes to the addition of a 6th grade teacher, because teachers will be teaching 5 periods with extra help and duty assignments, and the addition of the World Language Program to 6th grade, which I think is fantastic. It's something I had at my former middle school when I served as principal at Port Jefferson. And the idea is kids get to explore each language. They do 1 quarter where they just do culture and projects, which is a lot of fun, exposing them to all 3 languages, French, Italian, and Spanish. And then the subsequent quarters, and they may go out of order. Each quarter will be different. Some kids will start with Spanish, and then do the cultural unit, and then they'll do French and Italian. Other kids will start with Italian, and so on and so forth. But it's going to be a nice rotation. Each quarter they'll be able to sample a different language, and ultimately, by 7th grade, they can make an informed decision as to what language they want to take. So basically, in looking and carefully analyzing our staffing, just based on our core academics, we're looking at 2.6 FTE increase for the middle school in core academics. In terms of our support staff and special education programs, we are adding an additional special class, because again, the idea is to retain as many students in our district as possible. Not only is that great for our community and for our students, but it's also more fiscally responsible, because it's actually more, it's less expenditures when we retain our students, because basically the cost and tuition costs of these programs tend to be somewhat exorbitant. So really the purpose is, again, to have these students among our students, because it has multiple benefits. There's something I used to teach in AP psychology called the mere exposure effect. And sometimes when students feel a little apprehensive about being around kids who have special needs, the best way to combat that apprehension is to just have them interact together. And it takes away some of the, those feelings. And it's hugely beneficial also for those kids with special needs to be amongst their peers as they move through our schools. So in total, for the middle school, we're looking at 3.6 FTE increase to the staffing, which includes restructuring of our middle school program and the addition of our special class. Moving on to our high school and our core academics, we are proposing a 1.4 FTE increase in staffing, because again, as I mentioned, more students are enrolling in electives. Our culinary program that falls within family and consumer science is again gaining popularity after the pandemic. There are more students opting for business courses. And one of the things we did in collaboration with Ms. Burke and Ms. Doyle is to decrease the sizes of our math labs. Math labs at the high school are there to support. Right now we're running math labs, class sizes are typical of a general education class. We want to reduce those class sizes to better support students in math, because as we know, they have to sort of go through a couple of Regents exams to graduate. So that's basically the 0.5 there. I highlighted all the little areas of increases in yellow, just as you see, more kids are taking art, social studies, there's more electives that are being offered to our civics programs. So that's what that 1.4 FTE represents. We're also looking to add another special class at the high school, again, to better meet the needs of our students and to keep more students enrolled within our district. And also the addition, and not really the addition, the reinstitution of a work-based learning coordinator. What that certification does is enables our high school and this person with this specific certification to align students with job opportunities in our community, so they can get credit. High school students can earn up to 2 high school credits from work experience. So the function of this is not so much a class, it allows 40% of a teacher who has this certification to forge relationships with community organizations like the YMCA, the Boys and Girls Club, to align kids with job opportunities that will benefit obviously our students, and also to work towards getting credit for students who work. This really affects a lot of students who have after-school jobs, who work, who may be deficient in credits. It's something that we instituted in my former high school that yielded dividends really quickly. And that person, again, 40% of the time is allotted to this function. And typically, there are business teachers who have this certification. 60% of the time is dedicated to teaching. So the 1.1 increase at the specials and support represent the work-based learning coordinator and a special class. Overall, projected staffing increase at Bellport High School, 2.5 FTEs. And I'm going to further summarize. Again, we're looking at a 6.1 staffing increase between both middle school and the high school. So the question is, staffing increases can be somewhat counterintuitive. How can the need for staffing increase when overall enrollment is down? I kind of mentioned this earlier in the presentation. I'm going to recap the answer. Number 1, the 6th grade program is being restructured to better meet the needs of our students. Number 2, the addition of special classes will help better serve our community and limit the number of students who require outside placements. 3, more students are opting for electives. AP courses will be running, even if they have potentially low numbers. What I mean about that, there used to be a practice where if Physics BC only had 5 kids enrolled, the district would decide not to run it. My contention is this: I want our students to be competitive. If we're going to be competing with larger school districts and our kids are going to be applying for competitive schools, they need these courses in their transcripts. I don't want to take this opportunity away from them. And when you look at the spectrum of education, when we talk about special education classes that tend to be small in number, we all sort of understand it. Using that same logic, some of these classes like a Physics BC, Calculus BC, can be small because it also kind of serves a special niche of student. And again, I want our South Country students to be competitive. I don't want to tell our students that, no, you can't take this class, there's not enough of you. The result of this approach in my former high school was that more kids started taking these classes. Because when you have a gap year where the class is not offered, the interest starts diminishing. When you have a gap year between, let's say, a Calculus AB and a Calculus BC, the skills are lost. You need that continuity. If a kid is taking physics, and wants to take Physics AP, you want to make sure you have that continuity. So I'm willing to run classes at small class sizes so that these students have sort of a competitive shot at these schools that they're applying to, which is really important. And I do think, based on my own experience, that the numbers will grow. So that was the high school. We also look at our non-instructional staff. I mentioned this earlier in the presentation. This includes everyone from teaching assistants, aides, monitors, clerical, buildings and grounds, safety officers, nurses, school health aides, our athletic trainer, our computer lab assistants, and a parent liaison. We're looking at an increase of 5 FTEs for teaching assistants because the new special classes are going to require additional teaching assistants. Athletic coaches, again, and club advisors not included in FTEs because they receive stipends, and that's included in the 2000 code separately. So you're not going to see them reflected here. And again, as I mentioned, the additional teaching assistants will support new special classes across grade levels. So here's an overall summary of everything I spoke about. We're looking at a 0 change in our central office, a 1.6 increase in administration support that includes our director of technology and a restorative coach, moving from a part-time position to a full-time position. 0 projected increase in elementary, a 6.1 increase in secondary staff, which includes the restructuring of 6th grade, the addition of special classes at both middle school and at high school, and students taking more electives. And again, the 5 additional teaching assistants to help support these new special classes. So I'm going to go back to the essential questions at the beginning of the presentation. First, what are the various functions carried out by our staff? Well, again, staffing is all-inclusive, including but not limited to central office, our school buildings, and all of the important people that help support learning and the overall safety of our community. What is a full-time equivalent, or an FTE, and how does it apply to school staffing? FTEs is how staff is accounted for in terms of developing the school budget. A 1.0 FTE represents a full-time employee, whereas a 0.5 FTE represents a part-time employee. And again, what considerations are given when determining staffing? To sum it up, there are many considerations, including maintaining and enhancing academic programs and securing the financial stability of the district moving forward. Which leads me to my fourth essential question, which I have in a different slide. How does staffing projections affect expenditures? Well, we costed out the cost of all these staffing projections based upon the different codes. Remember, the 2000 code is curriculum instruction. That captures salaries. The 9000 code captures benefits and entitlements. So the projected expenditures associated with staff for the upcoming school year is a whopping $895,000, inclusive of all 12 employees that we're recommending. So the question, which is a great question, well, where do we find this money, which Trustee Puccini asked during our last presentation. So I wanted to show you this chart, which chronicles all of the reductions we've been able to do by careful analysis. Budgetary codes have been reduced to levels that both secure our operations and allow for contingencies. What I mean by that is we're not cutting services, we're not cutting actual costs, we're cutting or reducing budget lines where we want to still leave room for contingencies and leave us in a sort of a financially stable position. And again, the staffing process is ongoing. We're going to continue to analyze our budget, look to see where we can make reductions that don't affect the operation of our school budget, so we can help mitigate these increases. If you look at the total of the reductions thus far, we've reduced our budget so far, not the overall budget because we've had increases already, by $1.7 million just by putting in the hours and carefully analyzing the budget line by line. What does this mean for our overall budget projections? Well, here it is. If you recall, during a few budget presentations, our overall budget was somewhere above $143 million. Right now, inclusive of these increases that we just spoke about, we're looking at a projected budget of $142 million. And this basically is based on, number one, this consideration I spoke about during our first budget presentation, which is to assure the budget development process is consistent with board priorities. Our 6 board priority reads as follows: to develop a fiscally responsible and transparent budget, maximizing efficiency and economy, ensuring the district is using its resources to deliver the best educational program, and meeting our long-term planning goals. I think we're achieving that in our budget process and our presentation. But more importantly, this is what I want to emphasize. Ultimately, the goal is to propose a budget that meets the demands of the school district in terms of operating costs, ensures that the school district is in a good financial position to address unforeseen costs, and to have an appropriate fund balance to help mitigate future challenges, and finally, ensures that our larger community is considered when proposing the final tax levy. And that's what we've been working hard to do. Right now, on March 22nd, we're already looking to propose a budget that was less than last year's budget. And what this means is that we're not necessarily cutting programs, we're reducing budget lines. And I also want to emphasize that the tax levy is not based on a budget-to-budget comparison. If you look at this in isolation, it looks like the budget should be negative or a tax levy should be negative. The tax levy is based on revenue, and you have to compare the tax levy from the prior year to the proposed tax levy of the upcoming school year. And we'll talk about revenues at our next budget presentation on April 5th, and I'll be able to provide more details as to where we are in that process. But I've been really pleased with the progress we've made. I want to thank Ms. Lee again for putting in the hours and really digging in deep into a budget she didn't create in prior years, which is a daunting task. Of course, Mr. Briggs for working with me in terms of our staffing projections, and of course, Ms. Doyle, who speaks and advocates for our instructional programs to make sure we're doing right by our students and our teaching staff. That concludes my staffing presentation. Again, I want to emphasize that April 5th, we're going to be talking about expenses and revenues again, providing an update to where we are with revenues and how that compares to our expenditures. And we'll have a better idea of what our tax levy will be, which will culminate in our budget hearing and budget vote on May 16th. I thank the board for their patience. I'll refer back to slides for questions at this time, and I'll defer to Vice President Hayes.
Okay. I'm going to go around in this direction to take questions and try to do it in order. So, Trustee Barry.
So I have a few just questions. As far as the restorative coach at the district level, I just wanted to know how that would work in terms of, is that training the folks in the thing or evaluating the effectiveness of the program? What is the goal there?
It's sort of like all of the above. So basically, that is taken by what's called a teacher on special assignment. So typically, you get a teacher salary with an additional stipend because teachers on special assignments don't work the 5 teaching periods. That's why the stipend kind of mitigates that difference. Restorative coaches engage in restorative meetings. They engage in professional learning, and we train other folks in the school district in our restorative practices. So we just want to increase the impact that that position can have. And I want to emphasize that the position isn't tied to a particular person. It's a position that will be posted for, and it's an application process that happens on an annual basis.
Mr. Santana, last year that position was just for secondary. We want to extend it K to 12.
Correct.
How, can you just, a high-level overview answer to this, in terms of the elementary school and the shifts in terms of the number of students as well as the shift in the faculty, does that mean ultimately transferring faculty between there, or is that faculty who are in multiple buildings?
No, so transferring amongst the building happens on an annual basis, regardless of what staffing projections happen. You have to look at the individual needs of the building. Obviously, the goal always is to maintain your staff. School buildings operate like big families. You don't want to engage in involuntary transfers. But when there are deficiencies in one building and surpluses in another, that's typically when people move between buildings. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. Then my final question, actually, I'm going to make a statement before I make the final question. So, I applaud the idea and the concept of additional classes, of providing smaller class sizes potentially in the high school. I think that will hopefully improve some academic rigor for these students who need it. The last question that I wanted to ask is based on the work-based learning coordinator, the .4 business teacher, essentially. Are those, how does an internship work? Is it for students who are career-focused immediately following high school? Or, what type of opportunities does this person work to?
That's a great question, and something I'm very passionate about. So basically, it's all of the above. So the idea of that time is to partner up, let's say a student's interested in veterinary medicine. Can we get opportunities for them in local vet offices? It really is all of the above. The police commissioner spoke to us at the high school, and in fact, he's hosting an event on Monday that I'm not going to go to, only because I'm going to see our jazz band perform in Stony Brook. But they're trying to recruit kids and try to get kids interested in law enforcement. So there may be internship opportunities with Suffolk County Police or the Sheriff's Office. We also extended this to students who work with landscapers, who work for restaurants, because again, it's about work experience, and they can earn high school credit for work experience, because again, the idea is, and there's a minimum number of hours, and it's not as substantial for the whole year, that the student has to work, and it has to be verified by the employer. But the idea is to start encouraging kids who work to go and obtain these credits. Second, create opportunities at a local level, and it's also like forge partnerships with like local employers. Whether it's YMCA, like I mentioned, the Boys and Girls Club, all these various local organizations that would love to hire our kids or offer opportunities. When I worked in Glen Cove, we had a huge golf course, and we had a catering hall. So a lot of our students worked at the catering hall and golf course and earned credit for it.
Mr. Pacini?
Yeah, a couple things. I think the first thing's gonna be quick. The comment on transportation says correction, athletic transportation included in a different budget line. So, which is 5545.401. Does that mean that that budget line is plus $351,800?
It already existed, so I reduced the other line, I reduced 5540,400 because it was recorded twice.
Okay, so it was budgeted twice? So you're telling me we over budgeted, we double budgeted last year for athletic transportation?
Yeah, essentially.
Essentially.
Okay. And then on the BOCES reductions of roughly, exactly $900,000. Two lines, so what is the first line, the $250,000 savings? What programs are we saving?
It varies, it's a lot. For BOCES, we have lots of programs, so on an overall analysis, I can cumulatively reduce it, we can reduce it by 250,000. So I could get you more detail.
Yeah, I'd like to see that detail. It's not specific, say CTE, it's like everything.
It's across the board. So basically, when you compare, we did a 3-year analysis and how much we've been spending in those lines, and that's how we're able to make these reductions.
But correct me if I'm wrong, the BOCES fees to the district fluctuate on a 3-year curve, do they not, or on a 3-year average? Am I wrong?
Fluctuate on.
Well, they change, right? We're billed on previous year, so we can see reductions.
No, we're billed current.
We
received
budget,
8 on the previous year.
you receive 8 on the previous year, but you
We're
don't.
billed currently, so like, we'll be billed, like, if from March, we're gonna receive a bill, that was for February services. In April, we'll receive a bill, that will be for March services.
Okay, so then the special ed line of $650,000 in savings, that's an awful lot of money with a line that says keeping kids in district. So aren't we spending more money to educate those kids now that they're in district and not at a BOCES program? And where is that increase?
So the increase is in our staffing, but basically when a student enrolls in a BOCES program with special needs, the cost per pupil could exceed 6 figures.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be happy to, I apologize, I don't have details, but we'll be happy to provide details as we plan to.
Yeah, because if a student who's placed out of district in BOCES requires a 6-figure price tag, doesn't mean it's gonna be free for us to do it, right? So, the same type of services.
So I'm gonna give you an example. If we're running a 12-1-1 class, which is capped at 12 students, and that requires 1 teacher and typically 1 or 2 teaching assistants. So when you think about the cost of staffing that classroom compared to 12 students receiving or paying for tuition, there is a substantial difference.
Okay, and we already have the staff that are specialized in what the needs are of the students we're sending
We're
out.
gonna be hiring based on our staffing proposals.
And those numbers are in the 12.7 FTEs? Okay.
So we'll be happy to follow up and show you some more details.
Yeah, I mean, I'd really like to see the details, and I'd like to see how far back we've been double budgeting for athletic busing.
Okay, Mr. Trent?
Yeah, I just have one question. With our students' social and emotional health being more and more at risk, I'm concerned that we're gonna be able to address it with the same level of staff that we had the years in the past. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so when we looked at the number of social workers, guidance counselors, psychologists, we exceed what's typical for our school districts already. So the idea, I think, is to have a better approach to it and see what we can do with the current staff. Obviously, if those needs change or we identify needs and increase, we always revisit it. I do think we're adequately staffed in that regard, even to meet the ever-changing demands. And also, one of the things that I want to note is really like the mental health crisis and demands are really happening. There's really a shortage outside of school districts. As someone who's had some personal experience with their own children navigating that system, there are not that many centers for our kids to go to and be screened. We have CPAT at Stony Brook, we have DASH, and that's like almost basically it for Suffolk County. And think about how many schools there are. So really, that's where I think the shortcomings fall. But we certainly are going to look at providing, for me, one of the my, I don't want to say initiative, but one of my goals for the upcoming school year is to really innovate mental health support staff, professional development, to better help the ever-changing needs of students. Because, again, I think the pandemic has changed people. Social media is changing people. And we have to sort of catch up with those changes. I feel pretty confident in our current staffing, but that may change a year from now as we continue to explore that area.
Thank you.
So much for me.
No? Ms. Kavanaugh?
I just have one question, it's kind of to follow on what Trustee Pacini was asking about. My question may be even just more basic. Can you just elaborate a little bit on this concept of a reduction based on 3-year analysis? Is this where you guys were looking back at the previous 3 school years' budgets? Just a little more detail about how you came to these numbers.
So you have to compare budgets to actuals, and
Right.
you have to look at certain lines. Again, I don't know if over budgeted or double budgeting is the correct term, because you always have to budget for contingencies. Again, a budget is a tool. It doesn't represent actual costs. And budget lines represents the maximum that you're allocating for that particular expenditure. So when you do an analysis over 3 years and you say, hey, I budgeted $100, I'm oversimplifying, for, bottled water, but typically you've been using $85 or you've been using $80 for the last few years, then you could say in good faith that maybe I can reduce that to a $95 budget or $90 budget. Still allowing for some cushion and some contingencies, because that's what we're mindful for. Again, one of the things that I think is misleading and something I didn't understand before being a school administrator is you want to create a budget that allows for a little bit of fund balance. You have to have cushion, because those fund balances is what's going to help us support our reserves. And it doesn't mean that you're over budgeting. It's basically you present a budget, and again, I'm going to go to the $100 figure because it's easier for us to understand. And if a $100 budget is adopted, we're going to do our best not to spend $100. So that we have an appropriate fund balance at the end. At the same time, we have to be very careful, because you don't want our fund balance to exceed sort of an acceptable amount, because that's when it will be decided by the state controller's office. And that's really the difficult part, and that's why it's been such a process for us as people new to the district, because we've really been analyzing line by lines. If you remember the school budget, it's I think a 40-page document with multiple lines. And that's what we're basically doing. We're just doing a careful analysis to see what our actuals has been, to make sure that what we present still can sort of certainly pay for the operating costs, that goes without saying, but make sure that we allow for some contingencies and that it allows us to have an appropriate fund balance at the end of the school year.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. That was helpful.
Go ahead.
So are we doing that line by line, looking at 3 years in the past?
So line by line is, I don't know, I think it's a disingenuous comment. It's not really line, but there are certain lines that are pretty static, right? So when you look at like ERS or TRS and those types of things, but essentially, yes. I don't want to misrepresent, and maybe I'm wrong, because Ms. McGee has been really going through that budget and looking, and it's been a process, and I feel like each time we go into another area, because the budget itself is so cumbersome and so big, because again, we're talking in generalities like the 1,000 code, 2,000 code, 5,000 code, 9,000 code, but within those codes, there are hundreds of lines. And that's basically what we're doing. We're just carefully looking at it to make sure that the budget we propose, again, is going to address our operating costs, allow for contingencies, and enable us, hopefully, to have an appropriate amount of fund balance at the end.
But the reason I ask that question is because I, as a trustee, would like to know the lines that you have identified that have that big gap.
So we just did, those are some of those lines that we demonstrated. I think in our next presentation, we'll have additional lines. Something else I wanted to talk about, and I didn't put it up as an item of discussion, is to perhaps host like a retreat for board members, so we can really dive deep into like these lines, because I think that would be a really fruitful use of time, because then you can have a better understanding of how we're making these reductions and how it affects school budgets, and not to do anything in a non-transparent manner. But our budget presentations are what they are, and we stand by it. But I would love the opportunity to better explain the budget process and what we've discovered.
I have a couple of comments, if I may. With regard to maintaining the small class size, I'm really glad that you're able to do that, because it fits in with Trustee Trent's question about social emotional learning and the mental health needs of our students right now. But it seems to me that the smaller class size means more contact with a teacher or an adult who could be that one person that might be the one that they form the connection with that helps them move along in school. So thank you for doing that.
I just want to say a comment. When my first year teaching, my average class size was 39 students. I had a class of 42 students, and it was difficult, to say the least. So yeah, what you're talking about is the student-to-teacher ratio, and you want that ratio to be as small as possible.
And also the restorative coach, I'm very interested in having you expand that, because from what I understand about the presentations by Ms. Doyle and other members of the equity team, you're already showing success in these restorative principles. So this is a way to expand that,
Right.
isn't it? From the schools where it's existing and getting it into other grades as
Right.
well?
Right.
I think that's it. More questions over here,
Yeah,
Mr.
good.
Puccini?
Thank you. The reductions in that same slide of 35, are some of these reductions to reserve budget lines or specific budget lines, right? Are any of these,
I don't know what you mean by. If we use the term reserves or reserves,
well, we have budget lines, right, for, say, workers' comp, right?
Right.
That funds a reserve so that we can pay for that, correct?
I'm not sure of your question.
I think the budget line represents the expenditure.
Yeah, these are the expenditures.
These are only expenditures.
Right.
This has nothing to do with what we're putting into reserves.
So
We have separate budget lines for reserves so these reductions are to specific budget lines, not to reserve budget lines.
correct. So,
Okay.
no, that's correct. So basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Gay, probably late April, we'll be able to project what our fund balance will be for this current school year. And what we'll be doing is proposing a reserve plan based on that. And so that's where we start deciding how we use our reserves. I know Trustee Hayes had asked this question a lot. So yeah, in late April, when we have a better sense, because the majority of the school year is already transpired, that's when you develop like a reserve plan, and then you start seeing how you'll fund the reserves at the end of the school year.
Okay. Maybe in the update tomorrow, can we get a breakdown of what your plug number is for each FTE? Right? You have a number, right, you put in, when you say we're gonna hire a teacher, you have a dollar amount that you factor in that, right? And they're not all teaching, so they're not, the 12.7, there's non-instructional in there as well, right?
If you look at the chart behind you, we broke it down by the different. So the 1.6 administration support is represented by that salary calculation. The secondary, it's actually teaching staff.
Oh, I can just do the math, all right, never mind, okay, I can figure that out, thank you.
But we'll be able to provide it as well.
I'll do the math, it's fine, I'm gonna do it now, so you don't have to send it tomorrow. So, because where my concern and I don't even wanna say concern yet, right, but it's getting late, and as I look at this budget, you added 12.7 positions, okay, and you cut 1.745 million out of the budget. I'm curious to see how that was really done, because where are the contractual increases from year to year, right? That's usually the lion's share of where the increase comes in, right? We have contractual increases for, what is our budget, 75 or 80% people?
So that's included in the 2000 code.
That's so that's there, you're saying those contractual increases are there, while you're adding, so that should go up every year. How does it not, if you didn't cut teachers, unless you had an enormous amount of teachers at the high end of the, and I shouldn't say teachers, staff members retire at the high end of the scale, and you're hiring new at the low end?
Well, that happens as well, but if you look at, those reductions, actually, the 2000 codes are showing a reduction, but it does include the contractual increases. That's what I'm suggesting to come in. I could provide details.
Because
I don't have the details now.
You're showing a 2000 code with a reduced, but with a reduction in dollar amount, while adding, not all the 12.7 are in the 2000 codes, correct? So would you say 7.7 of them are? I just, off the top of my head, there was 5 non-instructional, right?
It's hard for me to respond without the detail.
I understand, and I get that, and I'm just asking for more detail, whether it's in the update, whether we discuss it later on, because, again, I hate to be the skeptic, I really do. I've just done this a long time, and when you start talking about adding 12.7 FTEs, and you show 1.7 in savings, which is great, on top of contractual increases, the 12.7 of the contractual increases should have wiped out that 1.7. So, and I see where the other, you know, some of those changes came from, but it's just very contrary to what we've seen before. So hence the question, have we been over budgeting or budgeting twice for transportation and for sports? Because I find that hard to believe. I'm not calling anybody liars, but I'm kind of hard to believe that that went past anybody over the last 12 years that I've been sitting here. And those are the questions I have. And then when we start talking about funding the reserves and what our fund balance and our transfer is gonna be to balance, like, there's a lot to go here, and I feel like we're getting late, and I feel like I still have a lot of questions. So I just want you to understand where I'm coming from,
I
not.
totally get it, and I get it, because based on prior presentations and sort of the climate here last year, but, you know, I'd be happy to host a budget retreat, where we can kind of talk detail by detail.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of a budget retreat, only because I think this is a conversation that has to be had in public. It really, I get it, we can get more detailed and we can speak freely and things like that, but that's really not what we should be doing at all. I mean, in all honesty, truth be told, we shouldn't have, with all due respect to the presentation tonight, we should be talking about this for that half hour, 40 minutes we had that presentation. So I think as we go forward and we have budget presentations, I feel strongly that we should not have any other presentations unless there's something incredibly time sensitive, because I feel like we really need to be having these discussions. They should be extensive, they should be detailed, and they should be had in public.
And so just in terms of today's presentation, it totally was related to the bulk of our.
I get it, I get it, and it was quick, and it was informative, and it was a good presentation, but, you know, we're closing in on 10 o'clock. I lost 10 pounds from this heater, I'm sweating, dying over here. I haven't eaten dinner yet, and you know what I'm saying, like, and I don't wanna rush through, because I really want to dive into the capital reserve, because I know there's gonna be questions on that. And, you know, we lost everybody too, right? So I think we need to move this stuff up in the meetings, and we need to make sure we're dedicating time to this and nothing else until the budget's done. We have plenty of time for presentations after budget season.
Can I just sum up what I think your concern is, because it's been mine all along? I want to make sure that whatever budget we approve gives us enough money to operate our business for the next year,
And the
and to
foreseeable
cover
future.
everything that is in here and that needs to be done for our kids. And that also includes making sure we have healthy reserves, because that's something that the controller's office is gonna wanna see.
Absolutely.
Did you have another question, Mr. Barry? Okay. I think that's it for questions.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, coming up next, we're on F3?
Yes.
Okay.
So F3, in terms of our discussion item, is the proposal of capital reserve expenditure proposition. As I mentioned before, we had a capital reserve vote in the fall, in October to be precise, that enabled us to construct a new turf field or install one and enhance our security systems. We still have monies in our current capital reserve that's been fully funded, which means we can't add any more money to that reserve. And it's basically money that's sitting there that can generate not just improvements to our schools, but generate income in the long term in terms of building aid. What we're proposing is that we finally engage in the project that's been spoken about, I know, in prior years, in terms of replacing the windows at Baron W. Fritz that need replacing. We have the funds in the reserve to manage that project. And from our perspective, there's really no point in waiting to engage in these improvements. Because again, the capital reserve monies have to be used for these specific purposes, and I know that's been a pressing issue for our community. So I open it up to the trustees for discussion.
Okay, do we have to do a motion in a second and then have the discussion, or can we just have discussion first?
With respect to these items?
For just
Yeah, you're not-
F3?
No, you're not moving to approve them at this time, so you can just still
So
have a
we can have a
discussion about them.
discussion, but this also says, it's an item for discussion action, so.
So it's an action under, I think, a C, category C, so whatever the board chooses to move on, then you'll go back to C.
Okay, procedurally, that's how we'll do it.
Correct.
Okay, so for discussion, I'm gonna go in reverse order and start with trustee Kavanaugh on the proposal here for expenditure of, this would be the entire remaining balance that's in the current capital reserve. Is that correct? She's nodding yes. Okay.
No, I have no questions.
Mr. Trent?
Yeah, I just have a question. I'm trying to grapple with spending that amount of money on windows when we just received a very lengthy and comprehensive building condition survey, and I can point to half a dozen things on the first page of that survey that I feel would be more pressing to address with the $2.25 million that we will be spending on one building's windows. Can you just try to help me understand the importance of the windows for Redcrest?
So I think it sort of affects the classroom atmosphere. If anybody's been in that building, basically I think what happened years ago was there was a plastic film put on the windows that's sort of deteriorated over the years and it's darkened. And it just creates a sort of gloomy mood that's not really conducive to like learning for the students. And it is like a kind of a subjective way of looking at it. It's not data-based, but when you walk around that building, you feel like the effects of these windows and they can't be mitigated. And I do think it affects the climate of the building for staff, for students. I remember viewing prior board meetings, seeing committee members talk about the windows and the need to improve them. And they do need to be replaced. And I get your point with, we have this building condition survey. There's a lot of projects that we need to mitigate. So, some of those projects we have to prioritize, through our capital transfer line, if that's approved and adopted. And also we also have to start another capital reserve, which is the next discussion item. But this priority is based on feedback from community members and staff. It seems to have been a priority in this district, from what I understand. And in walking in the building, you really do notice the difference. It's almost like all the windows are tinted. And kids need sunlight, and they need to be exposed to sort of clarity. And the rooms are I don't know what the right word is. I don't want to say dingy. Is that the right word to use?
Gloomy.
Or gloomy. But I do think it'll really improve the atmosphere and learning atmosphere for students. But I do get your point. But I think that's kind of important to the school community, its parents, and to the staff.
Mr. Berry?
Ultimately, I think this needs to happen. Nothing to say.
Jamie?
The only thing I'll say, I don't have an issue with the expenditure and what it's going for. I think it's a good idea to get the windows done. It boggles my mind that schools are forced to pay such exorbitant fees for the things that they are. And it's true, because people look at this and say, why does it cost $1.8 million to put in windows? It should cost a fraction of that. But the prevailing wage and the e-biz and all that other stuff just does nothing but pile on the fees. I mean, you look at the fence we did at Vern Kritz a couple of years ago. We had a group of the sports leagues were tired of the field getting chopped up, and they had somebody associated with the league who said, I can do fence around that field for $15,000. Of course, law prevents us from doing that, so we had to go the bid route, and it cost us $97,000.
Let me just say this.
So that's the stuff that gets me crazy about this.
I agree with you, because in my former high school, I wanted to redo a bathroom. And my custodial staff could have done it for, $2,000. We ended up paying something like $60,000 to have it done through the bid process. But let me just say this, and I may hope you feel better. This is aidable at 76%.
Yeah, that's not favorable to the taxpayer though.
No,
I get
of
it,
course.
to the budget it is, but the taxpayer is still paying
But
$1.8 million.
ultimately, that aid comes and helps with revenue.
It should be.
Understood, but it's still taxpayer money, so it's just kind of churning the same thing. It's like the hamster wheel with dollars flying around there.
But it's a good thing you're on the executive committee for
Yeah.
Suffolk School
Yeah,
Boards
well, I mean,
Association. and
we
you can
complain about
deal
it all
with
the time. It's
resolutions, so.
never gonna change because it's politics and all
Okay.
that, but.
So my only comment was, when they redid the windows over at Kramer Street, I remember going in and it was just like, it was really eye-opening at that point. So I'm in favor of going ahead with this project. I think you were not here when we went
Yeah.
around. Do you
I'm sorry,
have a
Ms. Hayes.
comment?
No, all right.
Okay.
Barbara has something.
Ms. Hayes, just one thing, Ms. Flynn has brought to my attention that the resolution for this item is not in fact in C. C is just the legal notice. So you'll have to act on F3 first before the legal notice. And then with respect to items F4 and 5, you'll choose between those items.
Okay, so now we need a motion to approve item F3. Trustee Barry, second. Trustee Puccini. Questions, discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yes. Any opposed? 1 opposed. And so that motion passes. So now we can go on to C4 and C5 and, okay. F4 and 5.
Did you say we have to do
Sorry.
C6 now?
Do we go back and do C?
We should probably just do
Go
C6.
back and do C and take care of it.
Hang on just a moment. So C6, I believe includes options.
Yes.
And
Oh.
you'll need to
Yeah.
choose between 2A and 2B
Correct.
before you go back to C6.
Correct.
All right. So now we're gonna go to F4.
So, right, so we have to pick between the two options. So there's two proposals, 2A and 2B. The first proposal, as we mentioned, if we engage in the capital reserve vote and we use those funds, we obviously have to establish a new capital reserve because it's essential that school districts have a capital reserve. And the community and the taxpayers have to vote in order to establish. So we're proposing two options that I want the board to discuss. The first option, Proposition 2A, speaks to creating a capital reserve fund that will be funded over the span of 8 years to the total amount of $10 million over 8 years. And again, if things go great, sometimes these capital reserves could be funded in a shorter time span, but the goal is to fund it over 8 years for $10 million. And then Proposition F5, which is Proposition 2B, would be to establish a capital reserve for the term of 10 years for the ultimate amount of $15 million, which was something we initially discussed last week. So we've gotten sort of different opinions on this from the people we've spoken with and consulted with. I'll say in full transparency, the 8 and 10 number is something that's a little bit more standard, an 8-year sort of time span with $10 million. And I think Trustee Puccini had brought that up last time when we spoke about 10 years and $15 million. So I'll open it up for discussion.
Okay. So, Mr. Barry.
Can we get an answer as to the question that was raised last time and again in between in regards to how this works? Because I think it's essential to this. If the time frame or the funds are exhausted, how does that work in terms of being able to reissue, or are you held in position for 8 or 10 years?
So the term is the probable term of the fund, and if you fully fund it prior to that term, you just don't add any more money.
You cannot add any more money?
No, that
You
is the
cannot put up
maximum.
another proposal in that time?
Well, it would be another capital reserve.
You can create another capital reserve in that same time frame.
No, you have to finish the first one, right?
So you're going to fully fund the first one, and if there's a determination that another capital reserve is required, then you'll go forward with another reserve fund for
Even
a
before you can expend?
for a specific purpose, right? So the purpose of of the establishment of that capital reserve fund has to be specified in the proposition. So you have that here. So I would think you would have, you would have to detail the other items that you're proposing when you establish that new capital reserve fund.
But it can be carried at the same time as this one?
So I think what he's asking is, can you start a new one before the 8 years is up or the 10 years is up?
Can you start a new one
Can you
before
layer
you
them over
spend
each
the
other? I don't
first
think
one?
Yes,
you
you
can.
can start it, you can start,
can?
you can start a new one, but again, you have to always keep in mind the purpose of the fund that you're going to state. So it wouldn't be for the same purpose, it would be for a different purpose.
Yeah,
Well,
but-
I mean, these purposes are extremely broad, to which, when I read it, I see that as, no matter what, if you're going to do it again, it's the same purpose.
Okay, so you can certainly request that your business office include a more specific purpose.
I just think
So-
they're,
Can I
they're
help?
extraordinarily short-sighted
Correct me if I'm wrong,
numbers.
I'll try to help. So basically, I think the premise is, you don't wanna hold on to an excessive amount of taxpayer money held in reserves. That's why there are sort of caps to, what are sort of generally accepted principles in terms of, when we talk about our TRS reserves, and I had this conversation with Mr. Gee, it's kind of permissible for you to have like 4 years' worth of the cost. Anything beyond that becomes kind of like red flaggish, because the idea is we don't want to over budget. We don't want to keep taxpayer money in accounts at an excessive amount. So let's say we approve a $10 million capital reserve that's fully funded. I don't know, and to establish another $10 million fund before we spend it may be questioned by our taxpayers, like what's the purpose of the additional $10
Because you have the
million?
money to do it.
Hmm?
The answer would be because you had the money to do it.
No, right, but if you have the money, yeah, but that's, yeah.
You don't have to fund the reserve just because you have it.
Right.
Like, the reserve can be there, and you
Yeah.
can fund it.
That's
5
why
years
I'm
down the
saying
road.
this dollar amount is too short-sighted.
Yeah, but I think we have to be reasonable, because again, when we talk about the $80 million worth of work that the buildings need that trustee Trang had
$80
referred
million, we're
to.
talking about $10 million.
But this is
hold on,
not-
But this isn't for that. The
Correct.
district's gonna have to take a bond.
Eventually.
This isn't a bond, we're not borrowing money, this is our own savings account we're establishing.
Right.
For what you're talking about, to get the $80 million, this district has to start planning, within the next 3 years, we need voter approval for a bond. There's significant work that has to get done. So.
And what happens when interest rates continue to climb in that time period, and this becomes a better alternative to that?
But I don't think we can carry that much reserves.
You're never gonna be able to fund $80 million in a capital reserve in the time you have to do it. Your budget line is gonna be extraordinary. You know what I'm saying? So to do $80 million worth of work, you gotta borrow money. We're not borrowing money here, we're just creating a savings account.
Right.
So,
But,
there's no district that, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, there's no way a district is ever gonna be able to save $80 million to do significant work over the course of, take 50, 60 years to do it. It just, there's not enough room with the
But
tax
in
cap
8 or
right now.
10 years, $10 million may be considerably short of what that is.
Which is why in the next 3 years, we need to do a bond.
But Mr. Gee, can you just comment on it's not good practice to have reserves with an exorbitant amount of money. Is that correct?
Right, so we're anticipating that we're gonna be able to put a little bit of money at the end of each year into that reserve. So let's say we do 2 million one year, and then 2 million another, and then 2 million another. So that's how, we're looking at this. We're not thinking that we're gonna put 10 million in year one, and then year two, we're gonna put 30
What happens if
million.
you have 2.1 and 2.1 and 2.1? You've already extended beyond this number.
That's
Well,
6.2.
2.1 times.
6.3.
Over 10
Yeah,
years.
you could do 2.1,
Keep
but then
going.
one year you might have
No,
1.1.
No, you
The
stop when
8
you
year
get
is-
to the dollar amount.
Yeah,
You
you
don't-
stop when you
Right.
get to the.
But then you cannot restart again for the same purpose.
No, but at that point, you use it.
Was the question we
You
started with.
can if you spend it.
Yeah.
That's the part you're missing.
Yes,
I asked the question, my first question was, can you restart it within that same time period? And I was told no.
What do you mean
If it's gone,
restart?
you can. right?
Hold on, I think I understand. I think what Mr. Barry's asking is, if 3 years into a capital reserve, we decide we wanna do another one, cause we wanna do more work, and we wanna add, right?
Say the
Right.
budget is going in that positive thing, and you can
But what
go
you're
beyond that.
suggesting, the way we're understanding, I think everybody's understanding, is that you're saying, should we come to a point where we can fund 2 reserves at the same time?
Or have one expended. Either way, you're saying within that time period, there is a constraint on the district to start another one for the same purpose.
No. So what I'm saying is that if you want to expend monies from that capital reserve fund, you can do so after the first year. You can't do it within the first year. But you can request voter approval to expend, monies from that fund, up to the total amount that you have in it at that point.
So, say we do $10 million in 6 years. And we talk about it.
Save or spend?
We've
put into
saved
this.
and spent.
Okay.
It's gone.
And it's
Right.
gone.
Then you do a new capital reserve.
But I thought my question,
No,
the
once it's
original
fully
question
funded,
was, can we
I
do
get
it
it.
within that
No,
time
now I
period, within
understand
that
it.
10 years?
You know what I was thinking,
or
that,
within that
that
8
you do it
years?
before you spend it. No, if you fully fund the capital reserve, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Gee or Ms. Holtz, let's say in the best case scenario, we do a $10 million reserve and we fund it in 3 years.
Yeah.
Then you spend it, because you don't want that taxpayer money just lying there. Even though you gain interest from it, the idea is to use it to make capital improvements. Once it's spent, even though it's only 3 years, it's gone, you can vote to have a new capital reserve started.
Within that time period for the same purpose?
So your probable term that you establish now, right, should be the amount of time you think it's gonna take to fund that reserve. Right, it's possible you might fund it early,
Right.
and in that case, you're not gonna put more money into it, because you can't, because the voters only approved up to X dollars.
Right.
If you spend that money during the term down to 0, and we're still within the probable term, your question is, can you refund the same capital reserve? So,
Or can you refund a new
you
capital
start- I think he's
reserve
asking,
in
can you
that
start a
time
new
you
period?
can start a new one with voter approval, certainly, with voter approval.
Within that time period?
Yes, but the question as to whether you can refund, fund that same capital reserve, I don't know what the comptroller would say about that, frankly, because you have.
But you can establish a new capital reserve for the same purpose within that same time period?
With voter approval.
With voter approval.
And
Okay.
if, correct me if I'm wrong,
Okay.
if the first capital reserve is spent, you can't still be funding and using the capital reserve number 1 and then start capital reserve number 2 before you expend all the funds in capital 1.
You can.
Unless, I think if I understand what you said, unless you're more specific in what you're using it for.
So
Would that
if
be
you-
safe to say?
If you have 2 capital reserves that each have money in them, you can certainly, so long as you're not in year 1 for either of those capital reserves, you can certainly spend money from each of them with voter approval. Right, so if you have a big project and it encompasses lots of different things, and you have, you have a desire to bring to the voters a proposal to spend money from both of those capital reserves, you can do it, right? Then you put together a voter proposition that allows you to spend money from both reserves and the specifics of how you spend those reserves, so it's certainly possible. And I believe it's been done here in the past, long ago, we're spending from 2 separate reserves.
This reserve that we're finishing now is the first reserve we've had in this district for a very long time, so I don't think that's the case.
Okay, all right.
But you can't have 2 capital reserves running at the same time for the same purpose.
Well, I mean, let's take it at a very granular level, right? If we have,
Windows at Vern Crits, right? Let's say it costs let's say $10 million, right? You set up a capital reserve and you fund it halfway. You can't set up another one for another $10 million for the same purpose.
I mean, you can request that the voters approve it, but it doesn't make logical sense, right? If you're requesting approval for $10 million for Windows at Vern Crits in year 1, and then you try to get voter approval for another capital reserve for $10 million for windows at Burn Crits, it just doesn't make any sense.
What about if they happen to be windows at the high school, then, or, whatever, just as an example?
To me, it makes no sense to limit it to a particular purpose.
Right,
When we set
yeah, I
up
was gonna
the
say, these are
capital
open,
improvement,
I just.
Things can change. Like we've got
Let me see if I-
Energia that's helping,
Let me
there
try to
may be
simplify
other
it.
things that come along.
Again, best case scenario, we approve the Proposition 2A, 8 years, $10 million. In 4 years, we fully fund it, we get lucky, right? So I think what the district should do in that case is do a capital reserve vote and expend that money and then start a new one. And then you
Yeah.
keep funding it in that way. Yeah, so
You
his
wouldn't
question,
really
the original
want it-
question was, but wait, it's only year 5 and an 8-year probable time. But as long as it's already fully funded and it's been exhausted, correct me
Then
if
it
I'm
can be
wrong,
used again.
then we can vote
Go
for a new
create a
one
new-
because that one's gone.
That was what I heard the last time, but I've been asking the same
Yeah.
question over and over again, and I've
You
gotten
know what
a
I
different
thought the
answer
question
before,
was?
we have to look into
I
it.
thought the question was that, like, if you have a reserve and you have $10 million in reserve and you haven't used it yet, can you start another one?
No,
But you have to
I'm
use
worried
it.
about the limitations of if we are good
And
reservists.
Ms. Kavanaugh?
So I have a very basic question, and as much as I appreciate all of that because it was enlightening, what is the relative upside and downside to these two choices that we have? I'm not sure exactly who to direct that question to, but what am I choosing between here?
Mr. Gee?
I don't understand why one might be
Well,
better or
the 15
worse.
million in 10 years, we wouldn't have to have this discussion again for a longer time.
That sounds
I'm anticipating that we're gonna be able to fund these reserves maybe $1 to $2 million per year.
Mhm.
So if you did 15 million in 10 years, then it just gives you longer time to fund them. But it does make sense to do 10 million in 8 years. I think that is,
More
realistic.
standard?
Yeah, more realistic, and I mean, I think it would, like, the reason why we're putting 8 is because that's probable. So I don't think we're gonna fund it in 2. Maybe we fund it in 6, maybe we fund it in 7,
Okay.
maybe we fund it in 8. That's kind of why we're saying 8. I'm not saying 8 because it's like a guesstimate and then we're really gonna do it in 2. It's like a probable number, so.
My only fear and comment on that, is for the first time that at least since I've been paying attention, you seem to have a state that seems to be interested in support of its schools more than it's ever been before. And, I just don't want to limit our upside on being able to get that aid and utilize it for this $80 million worth of
And I'm
thing
gonna say
that's
this,
hanging up,
but to your point,
especially with
those 8
interest rates
percentages-
being crazy.
But those 8
They're going.
percentages have been around forever. The reimbursements, that's not like new, 76%, that's been around for decades.
No, but I think
No,
that
yeah.
with more like school aid, not building aid
School aid.
coming, our revenue is gonna increase, it's gonna put us in a better position if that happens. But I think if that happens and when we fully fund this capital reserve and like in a shorter time, yeah, it's imperative to use it because you wanna get, there's an argument, you don't want taxpayer money sitting in a bank like needlessly.
Yeah, like I wouldn't vote for a second cap. I mean, I'd vote no. I'll tell you right now, I'm on the board because you're telling me you're gonna establish a savings account and you wanna start another one and save more money before you expended it.
That's
That-
not what I'm saying, I'm saying the time period
Yeah, no,
is expended. I was worried about saying, hey, it's 8 years,
Oh,
we're
I
at,
see what you're
So you're
saying.
saying like if we did 8
We
years
have
and I
the
funded it in
ability to
6, in year 7, can I do a new one? And I believe the answer is yes.
So your concern is, if we did the 8-year one, does that mean we can't do another one within 8 years, even though we've already spent the,
Yes.
that's
spent
what
the
I,
first one?
That's not what I
Okay.
got from
You
your
can tell it's like
first question,
10:30
so I
because it's a really
apologize.
simple question that I found really difficult to answer.
All right,
And at
but
the
I
end
think
of
we
it, it's not even
have, do we
close to
have
where I thought you were
an
going.
understanding now that,
Yes, we do.
the difference, I think, between the 8 years with $10 million and then, or 10 years with $15 million. And we've heard a comment that the shorter time period seems to make more sense. How do we deal with this now procedurally? We've got to go back to C.
So if the board is inclined to approve 2A, which is the 8 years and $10 million, then you approve the resolution that's included in F4
And not F5.
and not F5.
So
Then we go back to C.
And then
So then it's 1 through 3 and I'm sorry, F1 through 3 and F5 through 7.
No,
It's
No.
F1 through 4. I'm
I'm
sorry,
sorry,
it's
4.
F3 and F4.
we're not consolidating anything on these, we're gonna do them separately.
F3, F4, and then C6.
We already talked
All
about
those other
F3,
articles.
which is to spend the, and we passed that.
Right.
And now we're doing,
Either,
4 or
Or
5.
so one has to be
Why
voted,
don't,
yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
take a
Assuming we have
vote
to
on number
figure
4.
out the vote on thing. This is gonna probably be a very stupid question, but I'm willing to put myself out there on this one again, after the last one.
Oh, man.
Why is it 8 years and 10 years? Why isn't it possible to say 10 million over 3 years and let the community, again, vote on these things more frequently?
Because you're committing more money than you can afford on your budget. You're saying that you can afford $3.333 million over the next 3 years. You don't know that you have that money. You might have it this year, you know what I'm
But
saying?
you don't have to fully fund that, and the time period extends quicker. I guess it doesn't really matter. Okay.
No, so again, it doesn't matter. But you also, you know, if we fund a reserve of $10 million a year, what, we're doing something.
So the way we're gonna do this is we're gonna vote on these separately. If we vote on F4, which is the 8-year, $10 million version, if that passes, we don't have to do anything with F1, right?
It's F3 and then F4.
Or,
What?
or
No, it's
F3 and F5. Because if we vote
F4 or F5?
So F3 is the.
We already did
We
it.
did that already.
Yeah, we did that, we took a vote
What
on
I'm
that.
saying
Voted
is,
on it already, so now
should we
it's-
vote on each proposition and vote one down and vote one?
Well, both resolutions are on here, so you can certainly vote.
Why don't we just
for-
vote
Well,
on 8
let's-
and 10, and if it passes, we're done with the other
All
one?
right,
Yeah.
so is there a motion to approve item F4?
I'll make a motion.
Mr. Pacini, second, Ms. Kavanaugh. All in favor of approving F4, which is the 8 years funded up to $10 million. It's unanimously approved.
Now for F5, you'll ask if there's a motion. If there's no motion, then it fails.
Okay, so is there a motion on F5? No one's made the motion, that motion fails. So we've now passed motions approving F3 and F4, and now we go back to C, don't we?
Yes.
C6.
I'll make a motion.
I have to
Motion,
make the recommendation.
oh, you have to make the recommendation,
So
okay.
administration recommends the approval of item C6.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, motion by Mr. Pacini, second by Mr. Flippin. Questions, discussion?
I was gonna say, do you have to amend that, because that actually votes for both of the things, the one we voted, the one that didn't carry, as well as listed on
The
the.
legal notices?
Hold on, just legal
No
notice.
legal notice, so it's going to relate to the items that you just voted upon.
Right.
Right, so, but the actual resolution, I don't
It
believe.
doesn't, I was just worried about
It just approves,
procedurally.
yeah.
It doesn't apply to a specific attachment. It will just be the legal notice that corresponds to the vote you've already taken.
I'll make a motion.
Does the caption have to be in there anywhere? Because we have.
No, because it's an attachment, it's just the
So
notice.
in the resolution part, do we have to?
Your
But
options
the city
are,
is too vague,
your options aren't related to the actual resolution, but it appears that the board has selected option 3 in light of the past votes that have occurred.
Option,
Option 3, which is
proposal
proposition
1
1.
and 2A.
And two,
And
no,
two.
it's option 4.
No. No, 2A was the 8 and 10.
She's confusing. It's F3 and F4.
F3 and F4.
Oh, okay.
That we've,
But F4 is proposition 2A.
Right, we're back in C6 now, right.
shut the YouTube channel off, it's getting embarrassing.
All right, so,
It's not our best
This is
show.
why we have 6th graders in the same class for 3 periods.
and our math guru left,
Yes.
right? Okay, I think we had the motion and it was seconded, right?
Yes.
To approve this. All in are you raising your
All in
hand?
favor.
Okay. It's unanimously approved. So that gets us now down to F6.
So the administration, we discussed the consolidated school calendar last board meeting, so right now I'm making the recommendation to approve the consolidated school calendar for the 2023-2024 school year.
And is there a motion? Trustee Kavanaugh, second by trustee Trent. Questions, discussion, all in favor? Unanimously approved.
You say, so I'd like to propose that we omnibus the final
I
sections.
know, but we gotta do just do F7.
After 7,
and
we
then-
omnibus
You
FG.
got it, you got
The
it.
administration approves the approval of policy changes made to policy 6550, the leaves of absences. Again, as a reminder, that talks about the 4-hour screenings for cancer.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve? Trustee Kavanaugh, second by trustee Barry. All in favor? This is unanimously approved. And now,
I'm going to omnibus it.
I think G, 1 and 2, and also H, and then I.
Do you want me to make the recommendation?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking, if you're,
I'm ready.
you can do the omnibus for all of those.
Ready? So the administration recommends approval of curricular items G1 through G2, personnel changes reflected in schedules H1 through H4, and business items reflected in schedules I1 through I4.
Is there a motion, trustee Pacini, second by trustee Kavanaugh? Questions, discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? All of those are approved unanimously. Okay, no more cards from anybody, so closing remarks.
No.
There's none.
No.
I do have one comment. I hope that student that's doing that internship on the HVAC program comes in here and deals with the system.
So honestly, I think we just said it wrong. None of us were equipped to adjust it appropriately.
Okay, that's just my final comment for the evening. I need a motion to adjourn.
I'll
Trustee
second that.
Trent, second by trustee Kavanaugh. All in
Everybody's in favor.
favor?
Everybody's in favor.
I need to see Mr. Barry's hand. All in favor, it's unanimous.